Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the South Island National Park Authority's Planning Committee. My name's Heather Baker, and I'm the chairman of this committee. Can you all hear me? Good. We are very conscious of our microphone system. Sometimes makes it difficult for people to hear. So we're all going to try very hard this morning. And since I've got a cold, as you can hear, I'm going to have to work even harder at it. So forgive me if it collapses, let me know. The Planning Committee is not a public meeting. It's a meeting held in public. The purpose of the meeting is for the committee members to listen to the officers' presentations and the public speakers before debating the issues and coming to a decision on the items on this agenda. I'd like to remind all members and any members of the public present that the park members have a primary responsibility for ensuring that the authority furthers the national park purposes and duty. Members regard themselves first and foremost as members of the authority and will act in the best interests of the authority and of the park, rather than as delegates representing the interests of their appointing authority or any other interest groups. During the meeting, you may see members using their tablets or phones. Be assured that this is to review background information such as the local plan, or maps or plans of the application under consideration, or other associated documents, or in my case, to adjust my hearing aids, which I do through my phone. To minimize disruption, please could I ask you to switch your mobile phones to silent? And can I remind members and officers to try and speak as clearly as you can into the microphone so that everyone can hear. Right, we've got through all that, so now let's start with the agenda of this meeting. And the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I have Debbie Kenner-Ford and Robert McCutter, and I think everybody else is here. Declarations of interest, does anybody have any? No, thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting, oh sorry, I beg your pardon, John.
Apologies, just to note that I have a relative that lives in Findon.
Thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 12th of December, will be taken as read unless anybody has any comments they wish to make. No. And I will sign those in due course. Item 4 is updates on previous committee decisions. I think the officers have some announcements for us.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, committee. Just to go back on a few items you determined previously, Hockley Golf Club, you might remember there was an application for land remodelling. You took the decision to refuse it, and that's been issued, so that's now out there. Hazley Road, Twyford, for 22 dwellings, which was another application that came before committee and was approved. The decision was issued on the 10th of February, and I believe that was an allocated site through the neighbourhood plan, so that's good news. Ditchling Rugby Club, there was a proposal for a new rugby pitch. You refused it. That is now at appeal. We wait to hear what type of appeal, but it has been appealed. And finally, the A3 north of Recharge hotel application, which some of you might recall, that's been refused, and there is appeal hearing, and that's scheduled for the 29th of April. So that's an update. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Thank you, Tim. I forgot to welcome Tim back as our sitting member on the council. Good to see you. So we'll move on now to, item 5, urgent items. I don't think we've got any, have we? No urgent items, good. So item 6 is the application for land at Elm Rise in Findon. And Sarah Round is going to remind members of the report content. Sarah.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to start with the update sheet, which members will have seen, but if I can just draw your attention particularly to the objection from Findon Parish Council, which was accidentally omitted from the report. The objection has been on the public access website since it was made, so members will have been able to view it in full, and it doesn't raise any new issues in that all the issues raised are considered within the officer's report. There's also a slight amendment to the recommendation which would allow us to refuse the application if matters of surface water drainage are not satisfactorily resolved. That's the update. I'll now take you through the site, hopefully, she says. Which, what am I doing? Why is it not working? Lovely. Thank you. Okay, so we are talking about Elm Rise, which is an allocated site under SD 69. Is my cursor displaying? Is that the one? That isn't it? There's a pointer. Yep, excellent. So this is Findon as a conurbation, the A24 running down here. The site allocation is this parcel of land here. The allocation red line actually runs around the rectangle, and there's this additional part which is in the red line plan which connects up to Stable Lane. It's an informal footpath at the moment, and as part of the application, the applicant has confirmed that they will seek to designate it as a public right-of-way. So that would be secured as part of any Section 106 agreement. This is a larger scale aerial image. So on the edge of the northern boundary of the site, we've got a mature hedge line with some mature trees in it. This is the eastern boundary with properties along Stable Lane. And the southern boundary, this is Kilmore Close here, and this is Horseshoe Close here. And this is Elm Rise here. I draw your attention on this map to number 1 Elm Rise and number 1 Horseshoe Close. We've received some additional late reps from the occupiers of these properties. They have made representations previously, and the issues that they raise as part of the late representations relate to overlooking privacy and flooding, and they are already covered in the report to members. This is just to show you the footpath. This is the footpath, a bridleway running much further north to the site. The site itself is down here, and this is a bridleway further up this track here, which runs up to the north. Okay, I'll skip onwards. This is some photographs of the site. This is the entrance, the existing and the proposed entrance. This tree has a TPO on it. It's proposed that it will be kept and protected during works. And there's quite a mature tree the other side also to be protected during works. This is a view from Elm Rise leading up to the site entrance. There's a gap between the trees there, it's about there. This is Horseshoe Close on the right hand side. This is coming into the site from the top of the site. So from this access here, so this is a further view from about here, and then we walk closer until we get to this gate here, and that's this view here. This property here is on Kilmore Close. I'll show you later on in the site plan the relationship between that property and the proposed development. This is showing you the relationship between Horseshoe Close and the proposed development, which will go in this field here. So this is the bottom corner here, where there's proposed to be a block of flats. Moving on. So that's just a reminder of SD 69 and the allocation policy, which I have been through in my report. Members will have already seen. This is an evolution of the design of this particular scheme. And just to make you aware, there is a bit of background. We refused a permission in principle for 9 dwellings on the grounds that was under development. The site asks for between 14 and 18 dwellings, the site allocation. And then we had a pre-app for 26 dwellings, which was dismissed, as it were, on grounds of adverse impact on landscape. This site layout is the originally submitted site layout with this application, which was subject to design and landscape objections. The objections were mainly centred on the amount of car parking, which you can see on the roads dominates space, the large turning head and the formalisation of a very sort of suburban approach to the gardens and landscape. So we have negotiated a slightly different looking scheme, which is 12 houses and floor 4 flats. So we have 2 houses this side. The access road comes in here. This is the TPO tree. It's RPA protected. This is the other larger tree. And then the access road runs up to the top. Down here, you use a faint wiggly line, which is meant to indicate a swale. You've got 2 car parking spaces there, facilitated by a dropped curve. This is the turning head for the refuse lorry. This is another unit. And then you've got a series of semi-detached. That one is detached with a small gap. Another semi-detached pair, semi-detached pair, semi-detached pair. And then this is a block of 4 flats, 2 stories high with a pitch roof, and will house 4 affordable units. We are looking at 50% provision of affordable accommodation on this. 4 flats in here, and then 4 of the individual properties, which are likely to be these 2 sets of semi-detached here. But that is for negotiation as part of the Section 106. This is looking down the site from the top of the hill, well, from the middle, sorry. So that property there is this one here. And then you're looking down towards this larger block of flatted units. And because of the topography of the site, we'll end up with buildings cut into the landscape. This is actually only 2 stories, so the first floor and the second floor. You have roof lights in the pitch. We've got a mix of materials. The originally submitted application was just tile with cladding, and that wasn't felt to be reflective of Findon. So now we have a mix of different materials. We've got brick and flint, and we've got brick and tile hung. We originally had some render, but the applicant has agreed that can come out because a brick and tile hung was meant to be more reflective of Findon as a character. There's a number of house types across the site. I'll try and whiz through these. This is on plot 1. All of the houses have solar panels. They will all have timber windows. There's quite a lot of conditions attached to this as detailed in the report, one of which is for materials and another of which is for detailed design of joinery, including sections, and also for barge boards and the relationship between the eaves and the verges. That's plot number 2. Go on, try and whiz through these. We can always come back to them. Plot number 3, which is the one that sits at the top of the hill. And then coming back down the hill, we've got 4 and 5 as a semi-detached. We've got 6. And then we've got 7 and 8 as a semi-detached. 9 and 10, 11 and 12. And then we move on to the flatted block, which is the one right at the bottom of the hill. Entrance in at this level. And then 1 unit here, 1 unit here, 1 unit here, and 1 unit here. All of the properties meet the national space standards. So moving on to the considerations. These are detailed and full in the report, but really the matters that have been raised consistently through the application are surface water and flood risk, car parking, and neighbouring amenity. So I've just tried to explain those a bit further. I'll say at this juncture we have an objection from the lead local flood authority, and our landscaping officer has concerns about their SUDS design. Now these principally relate to the fact that we've got a very managed drainage solution coming through the site. So this blue pipe is an underground engineered drainage solution. All of these areas of hard surface, which are permeable but will still be hard surface driveways, feed into this piped solution, which then runs down into a large tank underneath this suds pond here. Now the road is designed to camber this way, the site falls this way, and it will have drop curbs at certain points to allow runoff to go into the swale. The question from our landscape officer is, well, why can't some of these areas also drain this way? And why are we not seeing underground holding tanks here? The applicant on that particular point has responded that that would be an exceedingly expensive piece of engineering and might have a knock-on effect on viability and the provision of affordable housing. So they do all have rain gardens, they do have water butts, but a lot of the drainage solution relies upon an engineered solution. this is to show you the winter conditions. These have been received from some of the neighbouring properties. So you can see how waterlogged the field gets. This is running down towards the property on Elm Rise. So that's that there is the edge of that tree there. And this is the boundary wall of the property on Elm Rise. These properties here and the Horseshoe Close properties have they're probably about at least a metre, in some cases more, below this ground level, and they have.
Excuse me, Sarah, I wonder if you could speak up a
Yep.
bit. I
Oh,
suspect
sorry.
people can't all hear you.
Sorry, get closer. These properties here have retaining walls, and they sit lower than the site. So there's concerns from neighbours that water runoff will go into these properties here. The SUDS engineers on the applicant side have assured us that's not the case. The lead local flood authority have concerns about their infiltration testing and whether the solution proposed follows the SUDS guidance. We feel as officers we've got to a stage where we can ask members for a steer on all other matters, and we'd like to negotiate SUDS and drainage separately in consultation with the lead local flood authority. That's where we are. So those are the LLFA comments, which are also detailed in the report. There's been some comments on car parking. Now, car parking doesn't meet our SDP standard, which asks for 33 spaces. In this instance, we've got 28 spaces provided. Just to remind you, this was the originally submitted scheme, which did comply in terms of parking, but as a result, it means there's a lot of parking plonked in the landscape. So we are trying to weigh up the provision of visitor parking and the impact on landscape. And as officers, we've taken the balanced view that actually the submitted layout with 2 visitor spaces here and no other parking would be sufficient not to have an adverse impact on the highway. That's agreed by Highways, and there's no objection from Highways to the proposed development.
Sarah, I'm sorry
Yep.
to interrupt you
That's
again.
fine. That's
Could we
fine.
just go back to the previous one?
Yep,
So that's the original application?
that's the original application.
So can you show us a picture of the current application with its parking,
Yep.
please? Whiz back.
So those are the 2 spaces, and then every single house has parking. It's not shown on this site plan on the forecourt. Effectively, can you see the P's there? So that's side parking. In fact, most of them have them down the side. These guys have them at the front and one down the side. And then these are having them at the front. We've tried to put them down, or the applicants tried to put them down the side wherever possible on the advice of the design officer. So we, as a result of this layout, which the design officer and the landscape officer feel is far better in terms of its landscape impact and the design of the overall development, we do lose some parking spaces, and that's a balanced judgment. Shall I move on? Oh, can't go back now. There we go. Just go back. We're nearly there. Residential amenity. This is addressed within the report, but I just wanted to draw members' attention to it. This is 1 Elm Rise at the bottom of the application site. This is the TPO tree. This is a garage building, and this is the house building, and this is a retaining wall. This is the proposed location here of the SUDS pond. And there is concern from the neighbour that the weight of the SUDS pond and the attenuation tank here will put undue pressure on this boundary wall, and there will be damage and potentially flooding into this property here. There's also concern from neighbours that the runoff down the road will spill into neighbouring properties as it comes out. The applicant has reassured us that that won't happen because the road will be designed that any surface water runoff that ends up on the road will go straight down here and out onto the rest of the road. But that would be in a unique flood event. That's not a normal state of affairs. And then this is 1 Horseshoe Close here, and then we've got the distance here. I should say to members that there is some confusion. The drawings are not particularly clear. What look like balconies on the rear of this property here are not balconies, they're shading pergolas. So this block is a passive house standard block, and they have shading pergolas over the south-facing windows. And on the drawings, I originally thought they looked like balconies, but they're not. So just to reassure members that there won't be people standing at first floor level looking in this direction. And this just shows you the distance between the corner of this property and the back of this elevation. And then these are the back gardens of the properties along Stable Lane. The other, why is it doing that? Just do that. The other closest relationship is this one here on Kilmore Close. So that's number 3, Kilmore Close, and that's another property on Kilmore Close. That might be 3 and that might be 4 actually. We've got 22 metres, our SPD, I think off the top of my head is 22 metres. So we've got the distance here between back-to-back of properties, which is considered acceptable, especially with regards to this existing hedge. I should also say at this juncture, while I'm talking about the existing boundary hedging, that we are placing a TPO on all the boundaries of the site, so that in the future, any occupier of this property, or indeed of the surrounding properties, would have to ask for consent to do any significant pruning of the hedge or the trees. That relationship there's a bathroom window in here. That is 19 metres, she says confidently. So this is the back elevation of this property and the side elevation of this property, which we felt was an acceptable relationship in this instance. And then I'm down to my recommendation. That authority be granted to officers to negotiate flooding and surface water drainage in consultation with the lead local flood authority, and that we get Section 106 to secure 50% affordable housing, the creation and dedication of a public right-of-way and off-site highways works.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So that concludes our officer presentation, and now we've got some public speakers. So the first public speaker is Councillor Sean Smith, Chairman of Findon Parish Council, Planning Committee, and representing Findon Parish Council. May I add my apologies to the officers' apologies in that your report didn't appear in our original report, but please be assured that your notes were taken into consideration.
Yeah, thanks, and Sarah, you covered that admirably. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thought I'd get an extra 30 seconds there. I'm sure I won't need it. Few fairly short comments. The value of the site in any affordable housing viability test would be its current use as grazing pasture. And therefore, there's really no justifiable way that the provision of affordable housing in line with the local plan policy would not be financially viable. When I then hear the concerns around flooding, and I hear that the applicant's not prepared to perhaps take further financial measures to assure that really concerns me. And I think from our perspective, it raises serious questions about the commitment of the applicant and the landowner to actually provide policy-compliant, affordable housing in perpetuity, which is an identified local need, one that we are supportive of. I would urge that the access measurements to the site for this development are validated, because having measured them both personally and other members of the village, there is a significantly smaller access window than the one quoted. So I would urge that that was validated. If it is as small as we think it is, it's a real security, it's a real risk for health and safety from an access perspective. Finally, and it is very late, so I must apologise that, a series of videos has been provided to this committee that actually shows flood running through Elm Rise. And it shows torrents of water actually going down that hill, speaking further, I think, your concerns around the drainage issues that we face. And I know another resident will probably talk to that particular fact. It's very real, and it's a very real concern of ours. That's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Speaker number 2 is Samantha King, who is representing herself as a local resident. Please feel free to sit down if you'd like to.
It's easier for my breathing if I stand.
I think you'll need to bring the microphone a lot closer, otherwise we won't be able to hear you. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I am objecting to the proposal. I live at 1 Horseshoe Close, which is the house directly adjacent to the site. And given the time allowed, I'm going to refer to only 2 issues, the site layout and the parking. The site plans in the planning officer's report do give an inaccurate impression of the impact of the proposed site layout on my property. Firstly, the current proposals have placed the block of flats directly next to me. These flats are actually between 2 and 3 stories tall with the pitched roof, and they directly face my property. The ground level of my house and garden are my height below the level of the site, and I'm already several times of that below the fence line of the property at the back of my garden. And this means if the development goes ahead as it is, it will be like I am living at the bottom of a well. And I would expect to be surrounded by walls if I lived in the inner city, but not in a village. Secondly, the flats will be able to see directly into my bedroom, contrary to the report, given the ground level differences, the position and their height. And thirdly, it's also clear from the plans, I think, how overbearing the flats will be and how out of character they are to the surrounding area. Fourthly, the report indicates that the planning authority is prioritising landscape impacts in terms of subjective views from the national park over the very real impact on those living right next to the site. And how can that be okay? Because the landscape impacts from placing the houses further to the northeast, away from our boundaries, are overstated in the application. There are already houses at the top eastern end of the site, so houses below those would fit the character. And the site, as has been said, is surrounded by mature trees, which, when they're in leaf, do shield the site. Whilst I don't think housing should be on the site, there are ways to change the design to really reduce the impact. We previously met with the developer in 2023, and their design in 2024 moved the housing further to the northeast and did mitigate the impact a lot had they addressed the flooding issues. But for some reason, the design has been altered now to have the worst possible impact on my house. Turning to parking, the application is under the number of parking spaces, and the report suggests that this can be accommodated by overspill on the surrounding roads. This is actively encouraging overspill onto roads which are already narrow and have cars all the way up the side. And the addition of the footpath with no visitor parking will encourage more cars to the area as well as the impact on residents. This will reduce or cause problems for emergency vehicles. So we would like any conditions to request electric gates be placed at the entrance to Horseshoe Close to mitigate potential parking on our estate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our third speaker is Alice Bock, who is representing herself as a local resident. Good morning. Please feel free to sit down if you would prefer.
It might be easier, actually.
Yes, I think we can actually hear you better if you're sitting down. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Alice Bock, and I live at number 1 Elm Rise, and I object to the development. This site floods. It is a well-documented flood risk area, and to date, Cayuga Homes has not been able to provide SADs that will avoid flooding. Is the committee and Cayuga Homes aware that in 2001, following a long protracted discussion, West Sussex County Council paid the current landowner £1,300 for legal fees following a flood incident? Despite this, the landowner refused any flood mitigation suggestions. The site plan, which shows the retention pond and tank, does not reflect the 12-foot drop from my house. Where will the retention tank be emptied to? It's meant to go into a watercourse. There are none. And unless it's piped elsewhere, it will result in flooding to my property. Sarah has mentioned the retaining wall. It's engineered for the existing site, not for the overbearing load. The surface water drainage system is not appropriate to this site. It is located within a ground source protection zone and a chalk mineral safeguarding area. There is a history of runoff in the area, and with a notable increase in storm events on a steep slope will lead to further flooding. Swales are not suitable for steep surfaces. The access road at Elm Rise is 5.5 metre, but the gate and posts only measure 3.9 metres, and at its narrowest point inside the gate is only 3.6 metres. To widen would cause damage to the roots of the TPO, which could lead to heave and further risk of flooding if the tree dies back. My driveway is directly beside the access road and slopes steeply down to my house and garage. I do not understand how Cayuga Homes can say that the runoff would go straight down Elm Rise. It will take the path of least resistance. Finally, why no maintenance plans for SUDs on site? There's weekly, monthly and ongoing things that need to be done in order to maintain that it's proper function. And who is going to maintain the SUDs? It is totally unacceptable to expect the residents to do so, and local residents surrounding the site do not wish to deal with the problem on their own. An independent contractor must be engaged with accountability and a legally binding obligation of new and future owners of the properties of the site should include a residents' association run independently to fund the maintenance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have speakers in support of the application, and the first one is Mark Simmons from Flow Consulting.
The surface water management strategy at the site is based on and adheres to all relevant local and national policies and guidance. Based on these policies and guidance, surface water runoff from all developed areas within the site will be directed into and through a SUDS feature at source. The proposed pipework and SUDS features are designed to contain and convey surface water to the 4-metre deep soakaway manhole for all storms up to the 100-year storm event, including a 55% allowance for urban creep and climate change. Discharge to ground via soakaway manhole is at the top of preferred surface water management discharge hierarchy. Pipework is shown to form part of the SUDS network and is included for the sole purpose of conveying surface water to, from and between the SUDS features and soakaway manhole. Discharging all surface water directly to the swale with no pipework would result in uncontrolled velocities as well as creating erosions to the swale's grass and planting. Surface water runoff from the road, however, which carries the highest pollutant levels, will discharge directly to the swale via a series of drop curbs. Therefore, the proposed design should be considered a SUD scheme with engineered elements to ensure that the entire system functions effectively without increasing the risk of flooding on or near the site. In the unlikely scenario of a storm exceeding the 100-year storm event, there may be additional flows from the network. Topographical survey plans show the surface water from the site to Elm Rise will flow along the road channels rather than towards properties, due to the property boundaries being higher than the existing road channels. Surface water will be contained within the attenuation pond, which has been designed with sides no steeper than a 1:3 gradient to ensure structural stability and to prevent erosion. Water levels within the pond will not exceed 1 metre during the 100-year storm event plus allowances. Surface water from the existing land currently flows eastwards over a relatively steep gradient. The ground at surface is formed of clay, which is known to have exceptionally low or no infiltration value. Therefore, surface water would not infiltrate to ground, but would flow at surface levels across the site and into Elm Rise during a storm event. The introduction of a pipe and SUDS features, although in a developed form, will actually reduce flows from the land as the surface water is captured and conveyed up to the 100-year storm event plus allowances. The management and maintenance of the pipework and SUDS features will be the responsibility of the owners or residents of each of the new properties, where payments of the works will form part of the property deeds and or rental agreements. A copy of the drainage design layout and details, as well as the drainage maintenance and management document, will be handed to the occupants on completion of the property purchase, where they were made aware of the features within their own plot and the wider development.
Thank you. Our second speaker is Liam Russell from LRA retinue.
Chair, members, your officers, thank you. I was actually going to go last, but what I wanted to do is very quickly run through the high-level design characteristics of the site, acknowledging the other aspects that will be discussed by my colleague Simon. The designs are of the context. The context is brick coins, flint, tiles. The design has evolved with the officers, I think, really quite well to reflect a historic character of Findon, and we've certainly enjoyed that process, and we think that the outcome of that is a much nicer, more tempered design and scheme. We have reduced the scale, increased the spaces between the buildings, enhanced the landscaping, created the open space, and moved the buildings away from boundaries. Again, this has all been with your officers and reflects a much better outcome than was originally intended, not because we intended to do anything worse, but I think actually as the scheme has evolved, it really reflects the tenets of the national park very ably. We have 50% affordable. That is no mean feat today. We have 4 apartments and 4 houses as part of that affordable offer that will be reflected in the Section 106. If anyone doesn't know what a passive house standard is, then please ask. But it's one of the highest sustainable measures, and that's what the apartments will perform to. All of the houses have solar PVs. There are 29 spaces. And there's an interesting fact about 2-bedroom apartments, actually, nationally, that the occupancy is about 1.6 persons per 2-bedroom. And we feel we can see that the amount of car parking on the site is perfectly adequate and reflects modal shifts of working from home and so on. We're very happy with the design. We think that it will be delivered in such a way as to ensure that the quality is baked in to the final outcome. And again, that reflects the tenets of the national park. If you have any questions, I remain seated.
Thank you. No, we don't question you at this point. That's not part of the process. Thank you very much. And our final speaker is Simon Barham from Lewis & Co Planning.
Thank you. As you've heard before, the application is for a scheme for 16 units on a site that is allocated for between 14 and 18 dwellings, and the policy also requires the access to the site to be retained from the point shown on Elm Drive. The scheme's an excellent
Could you bring
example.
your microphone closer, please? We can't hear clearly.
The scheme is
Thank
an
you.
excellent example of sustainable development with environmental benefit, economic benefit, and social benefit. With regard to environmental benefit, the scheme's designed to a high standard, is an efficient use of land, takes account of biodiversity with trees and hedgerows retained, and has been designed to meet with the park's SDP on sustainable design. And as you've heard, 4 of the units are going to be passive house, which is 25% of the overall scheme. With regard to economic benefit, you've got support for the construction industry during the development phase, and increased council tax receipts, and increased support for local shops during the occupation phase. With regard to social benefit, we have the provision of much needed housing in general, and the provision of 50% affordable housing. There's significant public benefit that arises from the scheme. Roughly £225,000 in SIL will be payable on the open market element of the scheme, a public right-of-way across the site, and 50% affordable housing. 6 of those will be for social rent, and 2 of those will be intermediate affordable housing. In light of the above, the scheme accords with adopted policy, and we trust that members will be able to vote in favour of the officer's recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that concludes our public speakers. I suspect the members have quite a lot of questions on this. John.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 4 questions, really, if Sarah could just bring some light to them for me. The first one is the details of the condition that we're proposing regarding drainage. The second one is the distances of overlooking. I think we should just review those slides for the sections to the east of the site, those that are on, it's Horseshoe Close, I think, and Elm Rise. The third one relates to affordable housing. The affordable housing element of the site, is it for sale? Is it for rent? How long will it be for rent? Is there any rights for buying, etc.? So I'd like some clarity on that. The fourth one relates to the width of the access from Elm Rise. Can we just have some clarification on exactly how wide it is or what's being shown on the drawings? That's it, really, for now.
Thanks, John. There are quite a few questions there relate to the speakers that we've heard. So I think we'll go for the answer to those first, and then I'll come to the rest of you. Sarah. Somebody's still on. John, could you turn your microphone?
Lovely. Thanks, John. Okay, I will take them in order. We haven't got... Oh, sorry. I'll speak up a bit closer. We haven't got a condition for drainage. What we're asking, well, we've got one drainage condition, which is foul drainage at the moment, because there's no objections to the foul drainage from the lead local flood authority or West Sussex. What we are asking is that you delegate authority to us to continue to negotiate SUDS and flooding and resolve that in consultation with the lead local flood authority. And if we can't resolve that, then the scheme would be refused. Right, number 2, distance overlooking. Let me go back to slide. Okay, so this is going to test my eyesight. Between 1 Elm Rise and property on plot 1, that is 29 metres and 22 metres to this flank. Well, these are the front elevations of properties, and these are the flank walls. And then it's 29 metres to the property, and then it's 22 metres to the garage dwelling. In terms of Horseshoe Close, this is one Horseshoe Close that you can see here. It's 18 metres from what looks like a balcony, but is not a balcony, it's a pergola. So it would actually in reality be 19 metres from the flank, from the rear elevation of the flatted block to the corner of Horseshoe Close. Now, Horseshoe Close faces this way, and its garden is surrounded here, and there's a high retaining wall along here. So in actual fact, it's probably more likely that it's going to be the garden that would receive any overlooking rather than the property itself. I think I might have just whiz back through the photograph so I can show you. Yeah. So, no. There we go. So this is one Horseshoe Close here. As you can see, I'm sort of standing down, and this area, approximately here, is where the 4 flats would be. Don't know if that helps. I do have, I think...
Sarah, before you move off that point, we've heard that the levels vary. We can see, in fact, there that the field itself is higher than those 2 properties we're talking about.
That's right, yeah,
so
it is.
The overlooking effect potentially is worse because they're at a
it
much
would
higher level.
feel more overbearing than if you were a level surface.
So what's the difference in height between those 2 houses and
I do
this
have,
field
hopefully,
area?
if I whiz through, I should have a section. Here we go. So this is the rear elevation of the flatter block that's the closest to number 1, number 2 Horseshoe Rise, these properties here. This section line is taken through here, so you can see the height differential. So this is a person indicated in the first floor level of the blocks looking down. Because of the angle of this property and this elevation, you won't be looking, you're unlikely to be looking into properties, but you are looking across the back of gardens. And that's partly just the site circumstances. This is higher, and this was developed, I think, 20 odd years ago and cut down into the slope. So they are lower than this land here. the distance between here and here is approximately 19 metres. Go back to my, yeah.
Thank you.
In terms of affordable housing, we've got 6 social rented and 2 intermediate houses. They'd be secured in perpetuity through Section 106, so they would always be affordable. And then the 4th question was on the road width. I don't have any more information apart from what is shown on the drawings. I don't have any more information than that for members. We have got no objections from the tree officer, and we have got detailed arboricultural statement that reassures us and the tree officer at West Sussex that they can excavate to make this entrance as wide as it needs to be and is shown on the plans, without damaging the longevity of this tree. There will be 14% of its RPA affected, but we have a management strategy which would be subject to a condition as well, and the applicant is suggesting that you'd always have an arboriculturalist on site, that they would use a geocellular method of protecting the roots, and that there would be retaining walls around the outside of the RPA where there could be, to make sure there's no excavation into the RPA by accident. And we have additionally put another condition on to re-ask for all that information.
Okay, thank you. John, do you want to come back?
Yes, thank you very much. That's very helpful. Just a final point. Firstly, I welcome the right-of-way that goes to the west, or northwest, I should say. And for me, I think the layout and the design is actually quite good for the area. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
You sort of just addressed one of the issues. I wanted a cross-section of that north-south section of the site that overlooks One Horseshoe Close. Could we just go back to that image you just showed? I just wanted to clarify at the bottom there, where the red dotted line goes across, at the point of the boundary with number 1, is that their fence height, or is that just a sight line? So where is the height of their boundary fence wall? Is it in the dip, or is it on the top of the bank there?
Microphone, please.
Sorry, only one of us gets to speak. This dotted line here is a sight line. This is the top of the land. That I don't think the fence itself is drawn on here unless that's shown indicatively there. There were some photographs submitted with the objections which did show the back garden of this property, and it is sunken below this field as existing, and there is a retaining brick wall along here. So there is already quite a high retaining brick wall.
Thank you.
That was just one of my points.
Okay.
And the other, I wanted some other points of clarification. One, there's been mention of flooding in the field. Has there been any mention of any flooding in any of those houses because of runoff? So that's one point. And then I note I think I noted on the drawings that, is it plot number 7 has no allocated parking. Could you just clarify that? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Yep. Taking them in turn, we have had some of the third-party objections have said that properties on Beach Road and Elm Rise have experienced some flooding, but I don't know we haven't got particular details of those. They are just made as comments in the third-party reps. And then going back to your other point, which was plot 6, you are quite right. 7, I think it's 6. There we go. So 6 has got parking down the side here. And then that's 4 and 5. 7 is here. It should have. Skip. Sorry, we go all the way back. Oh, is that one helpful? Has that got parking on it? Mm-hmm. This is an older plan. Sorry, there's been quite a few. Back to this one. Here we go. So they are here. So they are actually forecourt parking here and here. I did ask the agent that question, and
Okay.
I thought
Thank you.
that had been updated, but that's where they will be.
Okay, thank you. Janet?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I realise this is a designated site, and I realise I'm not here to judge anything but what's in front of me. But I do have concerns of what's in front of me. Not least, I am very concerned about the parking. I think there should be, you know, despite the fact that people would like to do away with cars, let's live in the real world. We know perfectly well that there's, going back to the 1960s old estates, have you tried driving through them recently? I'm very concerned that there aren't more parking spaces. That's one thing. I note the materials that are planned to be used, and amongst it was flint, which I'm all in favour of, but not the flint panels. So can we make sure that should this ever go ahead, that we don't end up with just flint panels in straight lines stuck on houses? I'm also concerned, two things I really don't understand. What is a shady pergola? I always thought a pergola was a building standing on its own with doodly-doo roofs and things. So I don't know what a shade pergola is. And there was one other point which I can't remember now because I've put myself off. However, parking, I think, is a big consideration. I really don't want to see less parking, you know, whatever. I know what it was. Swales, we all know about swales, and the swale is sort of up the hill. Does it do swales flood at all? Can you tell me? I don't know if they, you know, perhaps someone could just tell me, Chairman.
Thank you, Janet. One or two confusion factors there. Let's see what else we've got in the way of questions. Gary?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. At this point in time, I can't support this application, I'm afraid. I just think it's too premature. There are too many things that I just cannot support on this one. And I came into this room very open-minded, thinking, until I saw a couple of the pictures. And then I was seriously persuaded by Samantha Kings, who represented her south, who lived at One Horseshoe Close. Before I carry on, can I just ask Sarah, could you just put up the photograph of the field with the water on, please? Yeah, that was the one. And will we all agree we've not actually had a 1 in 100 flood? That looks seriously flooded to me, and it's not a 1 in 100 year event. Now, can we go back to the layout, please? Now, what really concerned me, no, the one with the blue lines on it, please. That's the one. The one what really concerned me, and that sent alarm bells going through my mind. And I know you've given yourself 6 months to sort this out in terms of flood. I prefer not to give them that 6 months. I prefer to refuse it today. When you said all those little dots behind the houses, oh yeah, we could do this and it would really help, but the applicant's not prepared to do it because it might cost. So I prefer to lose a house and actually do it, because I do think that and just because they found an engineering reason to do it, but they don't want to do it because it's going to cost them some money. So I prefer them to lose a house or two, because when we visited this site, when it first got allocated, it was pretty wet then. And not recently, but that one, when I went then, I was thinking, ooh, I'm not so sure about this one. Water always goes downhill, and the water is the lady who was, I think it's Alice Brooke, said that water will find its quickest way it can go, and it won't go in a straight line. If it's a drop that side, it will turn right. You thought that might be useful.
I've got your drift. Thank you,
Right.
Gary.
Now, that's not the reason, though. I think the real problem, and the lady, Samantha King, eloquently said, where she lives, she's going to be looking up, and people in the first floor, second floor, will be looking straight into her bedroom. Now, with the greatest respect, when you put that little dotted line, people have got muscles in their necks, which means they can actually turn right or turn left. They don't always look ahead. And if there's somebody in the bedroom, I always gets drawn to movement, I'm afraid. It's just a fact of life. So I think this is, with where the block of flats are, it is overbearing and overlooking. And for that reason, and coupled with what Janet just said about the parking and the fact that they can't be bothered to do the other bit because it's a little bit too expensive, those are the reasons. I think this should not have been in front of us today. I don't think there's enough information in the flooding aspect that will cause it. And I'll wait to hear what Stephen was going to say, because I'm sure he's got a lot to say on the flooding side of it. I am really not happy with this, and I would propose to
Okay,
refuse
Gary,
it.
thank you. Andrew.
Yes, well, I'm aware, thank you. I'm aware this has been in the system now for over a year, and it is, as has been pointed out, it is an allocated site. So houses are to be built on this site, but for reasons that are beginning to become very clear indeed, there are good reasons why this plan should be looked at rather more critically than it has been to date. One thing I'm aware of, and I noticed this when I noticed that the parish council comments hadn't been made, I looked at the website to see if they'd actually made comments, which they had, once just over a year ago and once very recently. They made a fresh comment to basically back up, as it says, what they said previously. But also, a lot of new plans have been submitted within the last couple of weeks. And therefore, I'm not quite sure what we're looking at today. And there was reference to the change, but also with new plans come a reason and a necessity to redesign the drainage schemes around them. And I'm therefore very concerned that might not have happened. If you look at paras 9.8, the relevant paras in the document are 7.34 and 7.35 on page 22. There is the reference to the fact that the relevant officers are unhappy about the drainage plans. Yet, if you look at the policy in the plan on page 208, para 990, it refers to a site-specific FRA should therefore accompany any planning application for this site. Well, we sort of have one, but we don't have an agreed one. We're being asked to leave that to later. So that is a concern of mine, and we've heard definitely there are from people who've written in objection to this that a lot of their concerns are on the subject of drainage. And the problem is, once you build a site and once you get the drainage wrong, it's very, very difficult to ameliorate that problem. Combined with which, just one small thing, if we're minded to permit this, can we ensure that there's 2 extra words are put into condition number 4, and they are the words "in writing"? Normally they go in, it's almost, it's something I've beefed about for many a year. But I now move on to things which I think are more, in many ways, more important. I notice this is tandem parking again. An awful lot of tandem parking is now being put into these sites on ostensibly less impact, but of course it also has the impact that people, it's more difficult to utilize than parking, which is other than tandem. The turning head we were shown, which is presumably on the plan which has been submitted within the last few weeks, have we got the view of the local authority who pick up waste, whether that is adequate and sufficient to do the task? It isn't that plan, is it? I don't think it's on another plan, that more up-to-date plan.
Yes,
so their reaction, I was wondering.
There, it's on that plan, Andrew.
Yeah, that one. So I was wondering, and there's the other thing I was going to mention, the final thing, and again, this is in the policy, on para 9.89, it refers in the last sentence to when it comes to the views and the impact generally on the area, that single-storey housing will be encouraged in the more elevated parts of the allocation site. I don't believe it's a single-storied house here. Indeed, how do you define the most elevated parts? Is this elevated over the neighbours? is it's elevated in the sense of above mean sea level at Newlyn, or because certainly the flats are right on top of the house, some of the houses which are most concerned about the impact it has on them, and they are 2.5 story. As you can imagine from this, I rather echo what Gary said, and that is that probably with the fact that new plans have been submitted very recently, that this probably has come to us early, and there's work to be done, not least on the drainage to address the comments we've made, but there are other issues which do need to go away and be thought about.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Yes, I just wonder whether the officer has 1 or 2 comments to make as a result of the last 3 people. So let's. Is it? Very well. Very well. As long as it's quick.
Yeah. Most of my other queries have been asked by others, and I'm not going to repeat them. But I noticed that one of the speakers spoke in praising tones of the care that's been taken as to what these proposed houses would look like and how suitable they were for Findon. It is a full application. We rather flicked through anything that actually showed us what the proposed elevations of these houses looked like, and I was just going to ask that we could have a bit of explanation as to what, given that this is a full application, these houses are going to look like. I know
Okay. Yes, we can have another look at that.
Yeah.
Sarah. Alan.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Right, I'll try and deal with the majority of the points raised. I'll start with plan chronology, because there have been changes to the scheme. Now, a full suite of revised application documents was submitted back in November, end of November, and we went out to consultation in December. So all the relevant parish councils, neighbours and statutory consultees were reconsulted after the application had been changed. And then there were additional and revised drawings submitted in the run-up to committee because there were some minor errors on the plans. Now those errors related to things like windows not matching up with the plans that had shown, that semi-detached houses had been drawn the wrong way round, but effectively the layout, the height, mass and bulk hasn't changed since we did the reconsultation exercise back in December. And that's what the statutory consultees have responded to. So they have seen the site layout plan and that turning head, and there's no objection from highways in terms of refuse vehicles access. Do you want me to touch quickly on the look of the thing? The look of the development. So when the application originally came in, the materials were the same for every single property, and it was, I think it was slate roofs and wooden timber-clad houses, which our design officer lodged an objection to and did not feel that they were reflective of Findon or the character of the area. So we have had a lot of back and forth with the applicant on the changing of materials and the changing of the layout. And what they've done in terms of site layout is to push and pull the properties and move them away from this boundary line. So we no longer have a regimented line of houses. We have a more organic mixture of single dwellings and semi-detached dwellings, and then the affordable, some of the affordable in here. This, when we're talking about elevated, this is the highest part of the site. This is actually a chalet bungalow, so it is a single-storey property with rooms in the roof which are lit by dormer windows. And then we step down to, these are 2-storey properties, but they sit against the background of the properties behind and then the large properties along Stable Lane. We have had a revised landscape visual assessment submitted. And in terms of landscape and visual impact, the landscape officer is broadly comfortable with the scheme, albeit she does have some concerns regarding SUDs. In terms of detailed materials and the detailed look of the site, I don't have a full elevation of the whole road, apart from this coloured one here, and that is the south side. So this is the flatted block, which will be brick and tile hung. This a little pair of semi-detached, and then these ones in the middle are flint, with slate roofs, and you can see the paler colours will be clay tiles, and the greyer roof will be slate roofs. And then we've got some brick edge coins, and we've got timber windows. We feel as officers that we have got enough here to convince us that the end design is going to be good enough, and we have also got a number of conditions relating to the details of windows, so to make sure that we get the right kind of glazing bars in the right places, the sections through the windows, to make sure that we're not having stuck-on porches, and we are having properly built integral porches. And we've also got a materials condition to ask for samples of the materials to make sure that those are good enough as well. I think that's most of the questions.
Would you like to make a comment about the pergola?
Oh, yes. So the pergolas, yeah, I kind of agree, but they are shading pergolas. So they're a wooden structure, a lightweight wooden structure attached to the building. And I don't have any more details than you have before me in terms of elevation, I'm afraid. Again, that's something we'd expect to see as part of a condition. Just trying to get to the flatted block. There we go.
It's like a canopy, is it?
So it's like a canopy, yeah. So this is a slatted wooden structure like a canopy. So in the summer, it provides you with a little bit of shade from the high sun, but in the winter, it doesn't restrict daylight.
Okay.
And that's to achieve the passive house standard.
Okay, thank you. Now we come to Stephen. It's going to be a big one.
Father ominous. I have a couple of clarifications that I would like first, then I have some questions and comments. So picking up on the comments made by Findham Parish Council, paragraph 1 says there's no SEMP, or intimates that there's no SEMP. Now, that's usually one of the first documents I go to in an application, but I do confess I've missed this one. So have I missed it and it's there, or is it not there? And the second query is paragraph 2, the visual impact with regard to the proposed 3-storey block of flats. I think you've stated it's 2-storey, and I would like some confirmation of which that is. Thank you. Then I'll do questions.
Paul, do you have questions as well? And we'll add them all together.
My question was also about the height of the flats, because it was mentioned by one of the neighbours that the implication was the block of flats is higher than the housing, and that if you move things around, it would have less impact. But it all looks much the same. I mean, they are 2-storey, all of them. So just wanted clarification.
Thank you. Sarah.
Okay, so I'll take those in turn. Yes, there is a SEMP.
Can you speak up?
Sorry. There's a SEMP, and it is condition 6. And the second point was visual impact? Story of... 3 stories. Okay, so I would call it 2 stories. It's got 2 floors of accommodation. So that's it here. So first floor, second floor. And then you've got, these are PVs on the roof. They're not windows. These are PVs. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So, Stephen.
Okay, thank you. So my questions also revolve around SUDS, as you might imagine, and I know there's the condition in there to take it away and try to work on that for 6 months. But the first question I have is, and I apologies that I didn't send this in advance. I meant to and then didn't, so I apologise. Do we know the width of the swales? They look very narrow, and anything below 1 metre in width is likely to veg over very quickly. And the key concern here is the lack of a maintenance plan around that. The SUDs, okay, as long as they work. And that ongoing maintenance is a real issue, especially as it seems to be that that's going to be the responsibility of the individual residents to come together somehow to work that out. That's not going to be done quickly. That's going to take a little bit of time. So without a residents' association, I think we could have downstream issues following a lack of maintenance for a period of time until that's worked out. With regard to the attenuation tank, it's been clarified that that's a 4-metre soakaway. Have we got an impact assessment on groundwater? Because we're in a groundwater protection zone, a source protection zone in that area. I take exception and disagree with Mark Simmons' comments on the highest pollution risk being from the road. The highest pollution risks are actually from driveways, where vehicles are parked overnight, where you have hydrocarbon seepage, and where people wash their cars. That's where you get the most pollution runoff. And if that's going into drinking water source protection zone, I think that's a bit of a concern. A real crux of a problem for me is this badger set, I'm afraid. Now, it's not the badgers per se. Okay, that's obviously a concern. We have a primary duty, a purpose of this authority to conserve and enhance wildlife. That's not acknowledged in the ecology report. The ecology report is out of date, only just out of date. They usually have a shelf life of 18 to 24 months, and we've exceeded that. We know that there's a badger set on site. That's been acknowledged and accepted. We know from comments that it appears to be not in use. But badgers move around. They have multiple sites, and they open and close sets quite regularly. And that's really key for this location, because we don't know where that badger set is. We've got a width of site that's about 52 meters on average. You've got a 30-meter exclusion zone around an active badger set. Okay. That can affect the SUDS plans significantly. And it can affect several other factors of the build. So unless we know that information, then I don't have enough information to make a decision. That's crucial. And we, at the very least, we need an updated ecology plan and clarity on whether that's an active set or not. Do you want to answer those questions first?
I told you it would be a naughty one.
Yeah, I'll try and remember them. I did scribble them down. Which is... Yeah. I wasn't going to start with badgers, though. I was going to start with ground source and infiltration testing. So there is some disagreement between the consultant and the lead local flood authority about what testing should have been done and when and how much and how deep, because the attenuation tank is about 4 meters underneath, and there's questions as to whether it can infiltrate at 4 meters. So that is an item for it needs to be resolved. It is outstanding, and I can't answer the question at the moment. In terms of ground source protection, we haven't had any objections from the local flood authority in that regard, and the consultant is relying upon infiltration methods again. So again, that's something that would need to be mopped up as part of the negotiations with the lead local flood authority. With regards to the badgers, the set is the disused set. So there was a walkover in April 2024. So there was an updated survey which we asked for, Merrill requested. So they did do an updated walkover. The set wasn't active. There were foxes using it, but not badgers. And we have put a condition on, which is 22, I think, which requests a pre-commencement badger survey. So that would have to be done before any development started.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Stephen.
Thank you. I just wanted to take a break before we move on. So we know the location of that badger set, and whereabouts is that?
It's at the bottom of the site. Just get you. It's down. Come on, cursor. It's kind of down here in the corner. Yeah, I'm just trying to. There you go. It's sort of around here. And it is referred to in both ecology reports.
I haven't seen the updated ecology report, so I missed that. My apologies. So pretty much where the attenuation tank is being dug. So that's really crucial to understand that. A couple more points on the maintenance of this. It was stated that that's a 1 in 3 slope on the attenuation. How's that going to be maintained? That's beyond the safe working limit of most mowers, and certainly beyond the safe working limit of somebody with a strimmer. So again, concerns about the ongoing maintenance, that needs to be factored in. I'm also mindful of the South Downs design officer comments. The amount of unknowns we have here. There's uncertainties, there's discrepancies, there's missing detail. If this was an outline planning permission, we could work with that, we can live with it, but it's not, it's a full application. And there are so many questions. Mainly regarding the SUD systems, but the other aspects of this design as well, that I just don't feel I'm in a position to judge at this point. So I'm with Gary and I'm with Andrew on their comments that I don't think we're quite ready yet, personally. I was hoping to get all the answers I needed during the debate, and I've not done that so far, I'm afraid. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
all the points I wanted to make have been very ably made already, and I absolutely agree with Andrew and Gary and with Stephen. But I just want to emphasise that my concern, I find it amazing that for such an engineered scheme where flooding is such an issue, that there shouldn't be a management company or a resident association. The idea that they should be left to individual householders to deal with over time, and putting the people downstream at risk from negligence or neglect, rather, it just doesn't seem to make sense.
Thank you. Yes, if you can.
Yeah, so there isn't a management plan at the moment, but that's because the SODs and the drainage are outstanding and haven't been agreed. So there would be a management plan as part of any Section 106 once that issue is resolved. We haven't suggested a management plan at present because we don't know what we're going to be managing. So that's why it's like that. And there'll be a management company. Yes, sorry, there would be. Most development sites like this have a management company, and the Section 106 would require that.
Okay. Janet.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, there seems to me a lot of unknowns, and I would propose that perhaps we held a deferment. I haven't got a seconder, but...
Yes. Tim's got some comment to make about that, which is just what we're all thinking about, really.
Chair, thank you. Appreciate the debate, and it's given us a good steer. And I just want to be clear that if we are moving to a deferment, which I think is probably right, because you've all expressed concerns over the level of information and detail, we're clear on what we're deferring it for. And with respect, there's quite a lot of information around design, and we've been through that, and there's been additional plans. And unless you've got really serious concerns, I would suggest that the use of the materials and all the rest of it is very much in line with our design guide. So I think we need to think about that carefully. On the other side, of course, we brought it here in part because we knew the drainage and all the rest of it wasn't quite sorted, and that would be very legitimate to defer it. And whilst I'm on that point, I would suggest it would be around the details, because you want to be confident that you've got the details rather than leaving it to ourselves to try and thrash that out over the next 6 months. The maintenance and the future management plan, those are the three issues that we picked up that really come forward. And finally, and then I'll come back, there's been talk about, changing the layout, and I'm reminded of what Janet Duncton said. You're here to look at the scheme before you. And whilst some of the distances, some of the overlooking might be uncomfortable, they are not out of the ordinary. They're not out of kilter with the adopted design guide you have. And certainly our experience, were we to try and look carefully at this with an examiner or inspector, would give us some challenges. So what I'm suggesting is that the deferment is mainly around the drainage aspects, the future maintenance, and any other comments you might have.
Can I just clarify, Tim, with regard to the layout and so on? The height of the flats compared to the height of the two houses that are most affected, would that also not be a problem with regard to our guidance?
Chair, that is right. That's why I said as uncomfortable as it might be. Okay. The height of the flats you've had established as two-storey. I want to be very careful, but the size of the flats is not out of kilter with some large houses that you get in and around the place. And you've seen the design has been sensitively arranged. Yes, it will overlook gardens. We are not denying that. That shows that. But that is not an unusual arrangement. If you feel you want to explore that, please have a further discussion, but be aware it is broadly in line with your design guidance.
Okay. Does anybody want to... lots of people want to comment. And Alan, you can start.
Can I just say, express my total support for the way that Tim has just put it. I'm not, in view of what all my colleagues have said, I'm not opposed to a deferment to deal with these drainage-related matters in the way that Tim has just indicated. We do, brethren, if I can call you that, and the sorority, brother, on the committee, we do need to remember that this is an allocated site in our local plan, which we do want residentially developed. Apart from the uncertainty about the drainage, it looks like quite a good scheme to me, given that it is an allocated site, the houses look okay, etc. So I'm not opposing, because of the strength of view about the drainage-related stuff, the deferment along the lines Tim has just said.
Okay.
But we do need, we do need to be aware of the fact that we as an authority have not specifically, not only approved, but advocated this as a residential development
Yes, thank
site.
you. Andrew.
Well, that said, drainage is the absolute kingpin to this site. It's been mentioned by everyone. It's been picked up by ourselves in any case. But I was going to clarify on these flats that we were shown the elevations of T4, I believe it is, and whilst on one elevation there is a load of solar panels, the other elevation has what looks like 2 Velux windows.
Yeah. Is that right?
There's no floor. If they are Velux windows, they're lighting the floor below. Because those are
There.
our floor plans. Yeah, but that one there, yeah.
Roof light.
It's a roof light, yeah. It might be storage in the loft, yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Tim.
What I'd suggest is whether the overlooking will be minimal at that angle, and that would be taken into account were we to try and push it. Velux roof lights are very common these days to light up attics without other means.
True. Gary.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. 2 things. I agree for a deferment, I must admit. Is there a refusal or a deferment? Let's get the work done.
Okay.
So I'm happy for that. Could you just put up, Sarah, the picture from the flat to the one horseshoe, wherever it is, road, close? Yeah, just where you had the red dotted line looking into their garden. Yeah, that one. I know we're not here to design, and you've mentioned the word design. If that was just literally tweaked a little bit more away from it, so instead where the red line is, it's towards the back of the garden, I think that might overcome a lot of the issues. And I've just gone onto the topographical map from, that's a 15-metre drop from the top of the field to the bottom of the field. And I've got to agree with Stephen. He knows more about swells than I will ever know. I just know that water goes down, and once it starts going, it really goes downhill big time. So a SEMP, which is what the parish council said, I think there's a lot to be worked on. And please, Sarah, when you go back, tell them, and they're in the room, those little blue dots at the back of the house, I don't care how expensive it is, it needs to stop the flooding. If you lose a house, we lose a house. Thank you.
Stephen.
So just to come back on Tim's summary, which I agree with, but the other aspect I mentioned was the groundwater impact assessment. That this is right on the edge of a source protection zone 1, which has the fastest travel time from surface to drinking water supply aquifer. And with the amount of sedimentation that's likely to come off this site along with the pollutants, I think that's a factor that we really need to consider and will be going forward,
Yes.
other than today.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, they've got that. Good. John.
Sorry, finally. I agree with my colleague across the room in terms of the fact that the outstanding item for me is drainage. The layout I'm comfortable with, the design I'm comfortable with. We just need to sort that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul.
Me too, I agree with Alan, but I would go further and say I think the recommendation before us allows for negotiation over drainage. In fact, by saying that if it can't be agreed, it will be refused, it does it all. I don't know what we're deferring about, especially as it's an allocated site.
John.
Well, if we defer, should we also consider in terms of the design layout of parking? Because I note what one of the speakers said and what Janet said earlier about the provision for car parking is not going to be satisfactory, and there is going to be cars parking on the sides of streets further down the hill to everybody's inconvenience and probably going to constrict the road layout. So I wondered if that should be considered if we defer, and that's a big if.
Thank you. It's very clear, well, it's clear to me anyway, that this drainage system is a real concern to us. And it's true, Paul, that the recommendation does say, go away and discuss it and sort it out. However, I think this committee would be more comfortable if we could see the outcome of those negotiations and then vote on it again when we see those outcomes, so that we are confident in our own minds that drainage has been sorted to everybody's satisfaction. And I think that would be a much better way forward, which means we need to defer it. Alan?
My own position was teetering on the verge of saying exactly what Paul said, but I think I'm persuaded because...
On balance.
Yeah, on balance, let's go for deferment. I'm very sympathetic.
Thank you.
That's more or less what I think,
Yes,
but I'm
indeed.
going to support
However,
deferment.
I think there's a need here for us to see it come back. So, sorry? You trying to say something? Somebody's trying to say something around here.
No, it's fine, Heather.
Go ahead. You're happy with that. So we need a proposer and a seconder, I suspect, for a deferral. Well, Janet and Gary are very keen to be number one and number two here. So the wording, for this. Do you have one of you?
Chair, I'll work with Becky, but just for clarity, so we're deferring it so we can get details on drainage, maintenance, management plans and groundwater assessments, impact assessment, thank you. We will look at the odd bit of siting around the flat, and we will look at car parking, but on both those matters, on the car parking matter, it is compliant broadly with the thrust of the way government advice is going on vision-led rather than predict and provide. Your policies allow some flexibility, so whilst we will look at it, we have to bear that in mind. And similarly on the siting of the flat, we hear what you say, we will work toward it, but the primary reason is around those I've mentioned in relation to drainage. Thank you.
Are we comfortable with that, ladies and gentlemen? Good. In which case, we can vote on those, that proposal. Yes, for a deferment. And do we have a show of hands, please, for deferment? Thank you. And against deferment? One. And therefore no abstentions. So there we are. We're deferring that. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, members of the public. We'll have a brief comfort break. That's number 6. Where's number 6? So the next application that we're seeing is Grace's Farm, Martyrworthy Road, Abbotsworthy. And we have 2 applications in front of us here. One is for the full application and one is the listed building consent. So we're going to have one presentation from the officer and one set of presentations from our members of the public, and then we will make 2 decisions, one for each part of the application, which is the normal way that we deal with these things. I'm sure you're all aware of that. So, Sarah, would you like to take us through the report, please?
Yep. Just firstly to draw members to the attention to the update sheet and the fact that there's a couple of new and altered conditions on that. And there's a new clause added into the section 106, which is that we will seek to negotiate the works which shall secure the heritage assets to secure their optimum viable use. And effectively that means that we will state that some works cannot happen until those listed buildings have been brought back into the use which is proposed. But we can talk about that further on. Okay. Right, so we are in Grace's Farm, which is over near Winchester. I'm now getting feedback because I'm too loud. Right, sorry. So the farm is located here. This is the Itchen Valley here, and this is the South Downs National Park in yellow. This is the M3 here, and this is a bridge over the M3. You can see the larger farm here. It's a very large farm, over 1,000 acres, and it also contract farms about 400 acres. We are looking at the farmyard itself here, and there's a listed building, 2 listed buildings in fact, and the field behind. This road here, or track rather, is a public right-of-way at the moment, and it runs over the M3 and continues this way. At the moment, the public right-of-way comes down here and then past the farmyard and out onto the B's 3047, I think. I'll talk about this track along here, which is the railway embankment. It's not currently a public right-of-way. The proposals would designate the bits that are within the ownership of the applicant to be a public right-of-way. This is a lane called Bridget's Lane, and currently the Watercress Way, which is this route here, which is the safeguarded route in our local plan, stops here, and any walkers have to come down here to find a footpath along here and then back up to go over the M3. This land here, this section, is owned by Hampshire County Council, who have agreed that as part of the designation they would designate their bit of land to the public right-of-way, so we thereby get the Watercress Way connecting all the way along here and linking up to this footpath. Go on to the next slide. So we've got some site photographs. So it's a historic farmyard that's developed over time. This is a grade 2 listed threshing barn. This at the front is a cow barn. These are modern farm buildings to the back. And then here we have got a grade 2 listed curtilage dwelling, which I'll refer to as the stables. And that's grade 2 listed as part of this property here, which is Grace's farmhouse, which is not in the application. So that's separate to the red line plan. The red line plan sort of dog legs back up here and then up to the railway line, or old railway line, sorry, disused railway line embankment, which is along here. This is coming off the top of this track, so these are the views you get as you come down onto the site. These are the big barns at the back of the existing farmyard. The application proposes a new farmyard in this field. It proposes conversion of this building and this building into residential, and then it proposes 4 new residential buildings in the old farmyard, one of which would be a rural workers' dwelling. I'll come on to that in a bit. Just more site photographs to give you some site context. This is a big barn. That's a fairly large barn. That's a cow barn. This is the front courtyard. This current wall here is block work. Part of the proposals are to rebuild that in a more appropriate brick and flint. This photograph here is looking from round here, towards where will be the new farmyard. So the new farmyard is proposed to sit in this location, below the railway embankment and sloping downwards gently towards the existing farmyard, which gets changed to residential. So this is the proposed site plan. So here we can see the grade 2 threshing barn, and behind it we can see this large building here, which is at the back of the site, which is outlined in red here. It's proposed that the footprint of that building, it's halved really, and then that is the new, so there's three new units going in there, a semi-detached and a single 3-bed. This is the threshing barn from the back. This building here is taken away, and that is that building outlined in red there. These are the stables, also grade 2 curtilage listed. They're in a bit of a sad state. This, some pictures of the threshing barn, which is grade 2 listed, 1692. It's got a fabulous interior. Its spatial quality is something that the application seeks to maintain, and I'll come on to that a bit later, but you can see these fantastic timbers, which were new timbers back in the 1600s. Quite often with these buildings, you'll find they're built of piecemeal recycled timbers, but the indication is that this wasn't, and it was rather a grand barn when it was originally built. This is what I'll refer to as the nag stables, and this bit sticking out here is the gig house. And this is the grade 2 listed barn, curtilage listed as part of the farmhouse. So it's got some nice timber beams on the inside. It was built as stables for the farmyard back in the 1800s. It retains its roof structure. This is the site plan. So we have 2 accesses to the site, existing accesses, and they don't change. So we've got an existing access here into what is currently the farmyard, and then we've got another existing access here, which currently runs up the back, round the back to the big barns, because the kit that is used on the arable farm cannot get past this pinch point here. So that is your grade 2 curtilage listed building, and that is a barn. So they have to go around the back. Originally, when the application was submitted, there was a proposal to take this one down and put a 3-bedroom detached property there. Now, we had an objection from our landscaping we had a comment from the landscaping officer that probably wasn't appropriate, and the application was revised to take it out, and we get more of a courtyard form of development here. I should say at this juncture, easy to explain, that the way the farmyard evolved over history was courtyard farm here, unfortunately that one's gone, and then a courtyard farm at the back, and unfortunately the older building that would have been there has gone. These are the proposals for the new farmyard at the back. We've got 2 repurposed buildings, which is this one, and then we've got a new building here, which will be the cattle barn, and we've got a new building C here, which is a fertiliser storage shed, etc., etc. And then we've got a little farm workshop, which sits there. Site generally will slope this way. Turning circles shown. There's a lot of drainage under here. Sections. So this is the railway embankment behind. You can see it here. So there will be some cutting in and moving of soil, but there will be no cutting into the railway embankment. So that's shown here. So this is a concrete apron, which comes to about here. Moving on to the residential properties that will sit in the barn. So that's the threshing barn. The threshing barn will have an extension which will be joined onto it by a little glazed link. And the point of the extension is it will house the 4 bedrooms. So you have 1 bedroom in this part, and then this is one open plan space, and then the 4 bedrooms are housed in this new building, which will be brick and timber with a clay roof and lower than the principal elevation. There's no objections from the historical buildings officer to the application. These are going to be a semi-detached pair of 3 beds and then a detached 3-bed here with garaging in between. This one here is a mixture of garaging here for cars and then a rural workers dwelling here which we would secure via a condition. This is the threshing barn. So you've got what I referred to as the nag stables here, which becomes a bedroom, but they keep the most of the historical material in here, including the old nag stable. And then there's a little door created here into the main space, and then this remains one huge space with all the timber framing exposed. You then currently this wall here is formed of blockwork, and they would take the blockwork out and put it back to how it used to be, which would be a brick plinth with wood cladding above. And in doing so, they then create a glazed link here, leading to our bedroom accommodation here. These are just some sections showing you the threshing barn. I can always come back to these if you have questions. These are the Grade 2 listed stables, which will be converted to 1 3-bed dwelling. So there is more intervention to this structure, but this structure is less structurally sound than the threshing barn and needs a bit more TLC. But they have retained, wherever possible, the timber framed structure is exposed, and the roof is retained as it is. So we have some gable little windows going back in, dormer windows going back in there. And these are the new dwellings. So very much understated agricultural style. These are the 2 semi-detached, and this is a 3-bed. And then we have the rural workers dwelling, which is here, and it's a 3-bed. Talking about public footpaths, so this, as I explained at the beginning, is the public right-of-way that we gain as part of the application proposals. So that becomes a dedicated public right-of-way all the way along the embankment to Bridget's Lane and down. This is an existing footpath which stays, and then we're also getting another public right-of-way along the top of, or south side of the B 03047, and in the top of these fields, so that people coming up this footpath no longer have to walk along the road, which is what they currently do, and cross over here, which is not the best crossing if you're on foot with a dog and loads of children. So you stay within the safe confines of the field, and then you make the crossing back up here. So the main considerations before you, and as I've set out in the report in some detail, is the new farmyard, which we consider meets our policies, as I've set out in some detail. The conversion of the heritage assets to what is their optimum viable use. I would say that we have been through a lot of financial considerations with the applicant. We are satisfied that the use proposed for these buildings, which is residential, is the optimum viable one and will secure their future. And then we've got 4 new dwellings outside a settlement boundary, one of which is a rural workers dwelling. And then we've got new footpaths, 2 public rights of way and 2 permissive ones. The application is supported by the Parish Council and Hampshire County Council Countryside Services. Those are my conclusions. I've got to read them out. And so the recommendation before you is that planning permission be granted, subject to a section 106, to secure the creation and dedication of the public rights of way, both public rights of way, and the works of the heritage asset to secure their optimum viable use. So that's one recommendation for the full application. And then the listed building application, which you're also determining, is that listed building consent be granted subject to the conditions. Sorry, I've gone quiet again. Yes, that's it.
Thank you, Sarah. So we have 2 speakers now who are supporting this application. We have no public speakers against the application, but we have 2 speakers supporting the application, and they'd like to speak together, I understand. We have Chris Horn from BCM Wilson Hill, the land agent, and we have James Fraser from BCM, also BCM Wilson Hill, also the land agent. Would you like to come forward?
sorry, just a slight change. It'll just be myself speaking, James
Oh,
Fraser.
okay. Change of plan.
As Chris was just going to answer questions, but as you're not answering any questions,
Okay.
there's no need for him to be present. Oh. Lovely. Fine, thank you.
You'll need to bring the microphone very close to your...
That should be
Yes,
okay, shouldn't it? Right, good.
So you're speaking on behalf of two people, but we only have one speaker.
Yes, correct.
So you're then being allocated 6 minutes.
6 minutes, correct.
Ladies
yes.
and gentlemen.
Perfect. Good morning.
I know, unprecedented almost. Go ahead.
Right, good morning. The application before you has been submitted to address a number of requirements relating to a well-established family-run farming business. The business has been farming at Grace's Farm for 140 years.
I'm really sorry, but we can't hear you. I can't hear you very clearly.
Is that
might
better?
That might be better, thank you.
The business has been farming at Grace's Farm for 114 years and is currently run by the third generation Michael Gray, who is present today, and his son William. Michael is committed to best farming practices and protecting and enhancing the environment, being part of the Countryside Stewardship Scheme and Sustainable Farming Incentive Schemes. The application is a result of a number of issues which have increased in importance in recent years, namely what to do with the ageing historic and listed farm buildings which are no longer suitable for modern farming practices and the increasing size of farming machinery. The need for new farm buildings to accommodate the larger farm machinery and to ensure the farm complies with the increasing levels of regulation and environmental protection. Initially, a new workshop building was proposed within the existing farmyard. However, this required the removal of an historic farm building, and Winchester City Council Conservation Officer raised concerns regarding the loss of the building and the impact the building would have on the surrounding listed buildings and their setting. Therefore, an overall review of the farming operation was undertaken to understand the long-term requirements of the farming business. As part of this review, the viability, benefits and costs of the various options were explored, resulting in the current scheme being the only option to deliver all the competing requirements, as it provides protection of the historic buildings and their setting, protection and enhancement of the important landscape and biodiversity of the area, provides suitable community benefits, provides the farm with a viable and sustainable long-term basis. While the original scheme was well received, it was clear improvements could be made, and through discussions with officers, the scheme has been adjusted to accommodate various changes and additions, i.e. the extension of the watercress line, provision of additional footpaths, and provision of a rural workers' dwelling, along with adjustments to the scheme's overall design. As you will see from the committee report, all parties have worked hard to ensure the scheme meets the National Parks policy requirements, resulting in all consultees raising no objection or supporting the scheme. All technical requirements regarding highways, flood risk, dark night skies, nitrogen neutrality, sustainability, etc. have been met. The landscape officer confirms the overall scheme is considered to conserve the landscape character and will provide enhancements to the landscape through the additional links to the public footpaths, planting of native hedgerows and trees, along with the conservation of the historic buildings and farmyard. While the Conservation Officer confirmed any scheme to convert an historic building to a new use results in a degree of harm, the proposed scheme represents a sensitive response to the historic character of the site and falls within the less than substantial harm category of the NPPF. As outlined by the committee report, this application was submitted prior to the requirements to meet BNG. However, as part of the scheme, a detailed biodiversity management plan has been provided, setting out the details of the various landscape and biodiversity improvements to be undertaken, the result of which will be a scheme which provides sizable biodiversity improvements. The finalised scheme has received acceptance and support from Eastern and Itchen Valley Parish Councils, the local councillor and the Watercress charity. The application provides a scheme which ensures the long-term protection of the remaining important historic buildings by finding them a long-term and secure use, while providing the farming business with a modern farmyard. As this has been achieved This has been achieved while protecting and enhancing the important landscape, character and ecology of the surrounding area, along with providing a much called for extension to the Watercress Way. The scheme avoids a piecemeal approach to the farm's need for additional buildings and a lack of use of the important historic buildings, both of which over time would result in a negative impact on the character of the surrounding area and the setting of the important historic buildings. The site is located in a sustainable location within walking distance of Easton Village and adjacent to a bus stop on the main road, providing a two-hourly bus service between Winchester, Alresford and Petersfield, with Winchester only 15 minutes away by bus. We understand from the committee site visit that the presence of badgers was noted. The ecology survey undertaken at the time of the application confirmed the following. No records of badgers were identified on the application site. However, it should be noted that badgers are highly mobile and widespread, and if they are present in the local area, the situation on site may change in the future. Michael is aware of badgers on the farm, therefore finding badgers on the railway embankment is not unexpected. A recent inspection has found a number of potential active and non-active sets located on the disused railway embankment. The sets are located in the upper half of the embankment, approximately 10 metres away from the boundary fence to the field in which the scheme is located. The badger sets are outside of the application site, but within any 30-metre protection zone. Due to this location, in the side of the embankment, it is expected but not guaranteed.
I'm very sorry, but you have actually run out of time.
Oh, have I? Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you very much.
That was 6, was it?
That was 6 minutes. So, that concludes our public speaking. Members, it's now down to you. Paul.
Can I just ask about Building 8? Because I thought, and it was originally going to be a house, and you said it was taken out, but it still seems to be in, and it seems to be quite intrusive in the whole scheme. What's it for, and what would it be used for?
That's the building that's always been there, that is not being removed. The original plan was it would be removed and replaced by a house, but now it's remaining where it's always been.
Exactly, that's why I'm asking why is it still in the scheme, because it seems to me, given the changes that are proposed to create the residential feature of the listed building and the residences behind and take the farmyard to the north of the site, it seems odd to keep agricultural shed right at the front like that.
Sarah?
So, yeah, it was proposed to take this down and relocate it up here as a building. But because we did not feel that a detached dwelling right on the road here in this particular location was appropriate, the farmer wishes to retain the building as currently is, and will use it for forms of farm storage. The cattle are currently located here, but they will move up to the farmyard because cattle cannot live within a certain distance of a residential property. So they will move to the new farmyard with all the facilities that cattle need, and this will stay as a storage barn.
Thank you. Gary?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It'd be fair to say this is enabling development. Seldom have I visited a site and found that what is proposed, I can't find anything wrong with it. Suffice to say, and there's nothing wrong with it, this is what we've been crying out for across the park, to make our farmers sustainable, by let them diversify it. And so the fact that what they're trying to do meets with my approval. If the rest of the committee, that's down to them. But suffice to say, I think this is a fabulous development, and I would, like my colleague said beforehand, when we were looking at it, I would love to see this when this is finished.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alan?
Yes, I'm not going to be quite as gung-ho as Gary, but I do support the granting of permission for this scheme. I was a little bit nervous when I first just saw it and thought about, do we want to encourage over the national park situations where new large agricultural buildings are moved on to open land, particularly when it's open land that's more elevated in relation to the downs and so forth, while buildings, older buildings in agricultural use are turned to other uses, such as residential or whatever. But so one would need to be aware of that sort of point on other sites. But I am totally persuaded, having seen the site and considered what's proposed here, that bearing in mind the advantages and obviously the continued use in non-agricultural circumstances of the splendid old barn there, that there are advantages to this scheme which amply justify doing that. So while I just want to put down that marker, we wouldn't necessarily, well, as far as I'm concerned, we wouldn't necessarily, as a National Park Authority, be encouraging the moving of farmyards with new buildings into open land and the conversion of the previous farmsteads into non-agricultural use. In the circumstances of this particular scheme and with the benefits that are proposed by it, I think, as it were, I'm almost as enthusiastic as Gary, but I'm certainly going to vote in favour of permission for it.
And as you point out, this situation is exactly why it's come to us here.
Exactly.
Exactly why.
Exactly.
Antonia.
Yes, I think this is a very good scheme. I agree with my colleague that there shouldn't necessarily be a read across into other schemes along the lines that we would permit moving of farm buildings onto greenfield and then conversion of the existing ones into residential. But in this case, I think it makes enormous sense because of the value of the public rights of way that we're getting. I mean, in particular, helping walkers avoid the B3047 or that section of it, because that Abbotsworthy to Martyr bit is not something that anybody would wish to walk along. So, yes, a very good scheme.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yes, I was going to make comments very similar to those already made by Alan and Antonia, but in fact, similar schemes have already been permitted in the park. I'm aware of them permitted a long time ago. So I imagine there will be ones in the future, but obviously with the provisos that have been suggested. But one new comment I'd like to make is to do with the listed building consent and the conditions of the listed buildings consent, and that is condition 4 on page 73 refers to, notwithstanding what is shown on the approved plans, no damp-proof treatments are permitted by this consent. Whilst I can understand where people are wanting to go, and I don't pretend to be a historic buildings officer or historic buildings officer engineer, I think it's very much a case of I cannot quite understand why it's accentuated that no treatments can be allowed, because I am sure there are going to be circumstances where the buildings would benefit from it. Well, firstly, they would benefit from it in every sense of the word without having a detrimental impact on those buildings. Bearing in mind that in their current use, for example, the building which was a stables would have been a fairly wet building anyway, so any damp-proof treatment at the time would have been a bit superfluous, though you will always find a slate probably under a roof prop to make sure that you don't get rising damp up through that. Also, once you go into a residential building, currently the large barn is open to the elements, so it is being dried out. The structure is going wet and dry. But I just feel whilst I don't want to die in a ditch on this, I just feel it seems very, very bizarre to make that very, very no statement. And I do think that maybe we should give some thought to that, that if there are circumstances where the scheme would benefit in every sense of the word, damp-proof course treatment ought to be allowed, not condemned out of hand.
Let's have a word from the officer on that.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think having it in capitals, no, is probably unfortunate and just a typo rather than an overemphasis. That being said, we have had a brief discussion with our conservation officer, and I think there's one or two ways we can approach it. One is to include wording in that condition that says unless otherwise approved by the LPA. That's the first element. So that's one approach. The other approach is to add potentially a criteria in condition 3 that asks for details of flooring. And you can achieve flooring without damp-proof courses potentially, with the use of slate materials and the like. But either or of those approaches, I think we could address your concern.
Andrew?
If I may come back, it's not just damp-proof courses, it's damp-proof treatment. The whole thing is a blanket.
Yes, I think that makes sense, yes.
I mean, I think that's why Richard was suggesting one or the other. And actually, if you look at condition 4, if we put unless otherwise approved in writing, which is a legitimate thing to do, that enables them to look at not just the flooring, but all treatments.
Yes, fine, thank you. Daniel?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I think this is generally a great scheme. I just have one specific question, which is kind of sort of related to the last one, but certainly it relates to the threshing barn itself and the large space. I couldn't quite understand from the papers the extent to which the energy efficiency or lack of it, or were the measures going to be able to be taken to make that space effectively habitable, except in the summer. Is it realistic to make that into a residential space, I suppose, is what I'm driving at.
Sarah?
Right, I'm going to struggle with detail here. The grade 2 threshing barn, actually, I think, from the top of my head, achieves a 12% reduction in carbon. It's done with external insulation on the outside of the building. So the timber frame structure is retained on the inside, and on the outside of the timber frame is layered up insulation, and then the roof material, which is currently slate and will be going back on as slate, is put on top of that, or in the case of the walls, the timber cladding is put on top of that. So it is all detailed. They have submitted a sustainable design and construction report, which is all in there, and we also have a condition on as well to ensure we get those standards.
Thank you. John?
Thank you, Chair. My point is more of a, gosh, that's a bit too close. It's more of a general point about sort of conservation, restoration. So on parts of this project, there is a conservation approach, particularly to the threshing barn. But on other parts, it is a restoration approach. And it makes the scheme seem slightly mishmashy. So on the threshing barn, for example, the roof is going, the materials that are now on the building are going to be retained, even though they're not the original materials. But on the, to an extreme would be the stables, is also going to have new roof materials because the present ones aren't deemed suitable. And similarly, the wall to the front is now going to be knocked down, so that's not a conservation approach. You're now going to restore to what you think the wall is going to be, the boundary wall was at the front. So there's a mishmash, and I just think if we're going to take a conservation approach to this whole project, and I think it's a good project, and it's very nice that an old historic farmyard is going to have a new life. Sadly, they're not fit for purpose anymore. So something has to be done, and this is a very pragmatic approach. But I do think if we're going to have a restoration of one building, then it's a restoration of all buildings, or it's a conservation of one building and it's a conservation of the other listed building, not a bit of one and a bit of the other. So it's just, I suppose, in terms of a holistic approach to the whole site, there should be one policy or another. Thank you.
So are you asking that we review the materials that are being used on the various buildings and match them up?
Well, if you're going to restore the farmyard back to its original design, then you do it across the whole site. Or if you're going to conserve the site to how it is now, then you can conserve the materials as they are now. But at the moment, it's a bit of one and half of the other.
Well, it would all have been built in piecemeal, probably, in all different ages anyway. And therefore, the materials would have been different in the first instance.
Well, you could argue that the threshing barn, the slates were not the original material, so we should actually restore it back to its original materials, just like you're going to do with the listed building stables. That is the point I'm making.
Do you have a comment? I'm not sure what he wants.
Well, I think all I would say is that the Winchester Heritage Officer has made comments that it's an extremely well detailed, well thought through scheme, and he has been through it with a fine-tooth comb. The threshing barn is the more important building in terms of its heritage significance. It's Grade 2 listed in its own right, whereas the stables are a curtilage listed building. The roofing material on the stables at the moment is impractical and unsuitable. And we wouldn't want to see it retained. And the same for the wall, which is concrete blockwork at the moment. So I would say they have put forward an approach which addresses the significance of the listed buildings and maintains that as best they can whilst they change the use.
Thank you. John.
I'd just like to say I think it's a very positive scheme. My concerns were the impact on the wider landscape in terms of the setting of the new yard. It's such a large landscape here in terms of scale. I actually believe it can absorb such large buildings, so I'm very pleased to see that. The other thing I'd quite like you to highlight, if you can, Sarah, is the permissive routes that are being suggested on the fields opposite the site, which I don't think you picked up when you went through the presentation. Thank you.
Sarah.
Yep, I can do that. I talked about the public right-of-way going down here and the public right-of-way going down here. We've also got two new permissive routes, one of which will come off the existing public right-of-way, which runs down the side here, and go into the farmyard, the old farmyard itself, which means that occupants of the old farmyard can go straight out onto a footpath. And the other permissive route is all the way down the side of Easton Lane to Easton here. So this field here, instead of people walking on the road, they'll be able to walk along a path all the way down to Easton. And that was requested by Easton Parish Council.
Yes? Yep. Stephen.
Thank you. As with everybody else, I'm supportive of the scheme. I think it's a good development in what it sets out to try and achieve. I particularly like the enhancements to the public rights of way. I welcome the addition of condition 25 relating to the badges. Now, obviously, we know there's a badger set there. How that was originally missed off the ecology survey, I'm uncertain about that. But that set has been there since at least 2017, so it's good to see this is in here, but it's not a survey we need. We know the set is there. It's probably the mitigation plan that comes with it, but I see that that's included. With condition 13, again on the biodiversity element, I do have a concern about the wording here. So development shall only proceed in accordance with the measures set out in section 4 of the biodiversity management plan. Now, that biodiversity management plan is just shy of 5 years old. The shelf life of a biodiversity management plan is about 18 months to 24 months, and indeed on the front cover, or possibly page 2 actually, of this BMP, it says it's valid for 18 months and resurvey is required after that. So I think rather than this specific wording, it should read along the lines of development shall only proceed in accordance with the measures set out in an updated biodiversity management plan, just to give that flexibility. But of course, some of the things that were found 5 years ago may not be longer necessary. Wildlife comes and goes. There's a lot of work here for bat roosts. Those bat roosts may not be there anymore. So it's in everybody's interest to have a look at this, particularly as our first priority of a national park is to conserve and enhance wildlife. You could probably argue that outside the national park, that wouldn't receive as much weight. Inside the national park, I think that has considerable weight. So the information that we receive needs to accurately reflect the conditions on the ground at the time that the decisions are made. So if we can do something with that wording, that would give me more confidence. But
Yes,
yeah,
would you like to suggest something?
So we could alter that condition so that it's a pre-commencement condition. And we would seek a biodiversity action plan and surveys before any development, and then it would come to us for approval.
Okay. Any more? Janet?
Sorry, Chairman, I thought this was such a good scheme, I really wasn't going to say anything, but slightly facetiously, as Stephen's always asking for badgers, what a shame we can't do anything for hedgehogs, but that's another story.
Quite. I couldn't agree more.
But what I was also going to say was, also with John, I'm glad to see the block walls go and whatever's appropriate being put back in. That's all I wanted to say, Chairman, because I support this scheme.
I support your view of hedgehogs. My hedgehog family's just been eaten by the badgers, so I'm not happy, Bunny. Find me more hedgehogs. So I think we've concluded our deliberations, have we not? Are you two having a conversation you want to share with us?
Chair, I think we're just trying to clarify a few things. First of all, and I don't want to eulogise too much, but you know, when you think of our purposes, the policies we have, the drive, both within our policies and the government drive to support farm diversification, when you see the array of added value, and that not only ticks the seek to further duty, but also is embedded in your policies, this is, if we're looking at these sort of schemes, I think a very good exemplar. I take the point, and that's why it's here, that it's not always appropriate. But this is, I think, one that we really can say is to be commended overall. I'll stop there. What I was going to actually say is that there are a couple of changes I think you're suggesting which we need to record. One is that on the main application, condition 13 is going to be changed to reflect a pre-commencement.
Yep.
And that on the listed building application, condition 4, we'll talk about unless otherwise approved in writing, because there might be solutions to treatments. And then I'm going to hand over to Becky around the permissive footpaths.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we need to add to the Section 106 requirements, the requirement to enter into the permissive footpaths that were referenced. They don't appear to be in the list at the moment as part of the resolution. Yeah, we've got the 2 public rights of way in there, but no reference specifically in the resolution to the requirement for the applicant to enter into permissive footpath agreements. So we'll add that in.
We'll add that in.
Yeah.
Right, okay, that's fine. So we're going to take the full application first, and I'd like a proposer, please. Thank you very much, Gary and Alan, and the seconder for that. Given the amendments we've just discussed here, I'd like you to give me a show of hands, please, on whether you support that one. Thank you, that's unanimous. And then we turn to the listed building consent, which, as you've heard, has an amendment to condition 4. Can I have a proposer and a seconder again, please? John and John, thank you. And a show of hands, please, to support the listed building consent. Thank you very much, that's also unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. I think we'll move now, without any further ado, to agenda item 9, giving the officers a moment to switch screens and what have you, when we talk about the planning reforms. Okay, so we'll just welcome Tim to our fold. Morning, Tim. And this is the planning reforms. This is a fairly meaty document. You will note that we are not in the middle of a consultation about this, but however, comments that we wish to make can be made at the moment, and this is probably our last opportunity to make those sort of comments. So please bear that in mind and give it your due attention. Claire.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. We still in the morning? Not quite, no, afternoon. So, this report covers two sets of papers that have been given to us. The first lot were before Christmas. These are generally implemented changes, so things that have already happened, some of which we've already commented on previously. And then the second part of the report is around new proposed changes, which came out, again, largely in December, but some creeping into this year as well. So just to give you a brief flavour of those documents, National Planning Policy Framework, we now have a new version of that came out in December, on the day, I think, of December's Planning Committee. The main flavour around that NPPF is reversing a lot of the changes that were in the previous December's version, which were around making housing numbers advisory and reducing needs to show 5-year land supplies. So those changes have been reversed back to broadly what they were previously. But we've got a new standard method, so that's the government's way of working out housing need, and most local planning authorities are required to use it. And the results of those for some of our neighbours do actually double their housing numbers in some cases. Important to clock that those figures are based on council boundaries, therefore there isn't a figure for the national park as such. There's also a strengthening of the duty to cooperate in the NPPF, and to make it more of a duty to actually find solutions rather than just to talk about them. And there's a tweak to the presumption in favour of development in NPPF 11 around the sort of reasons that we need to resist development where there isn't a 5-year supply, for instance. That used to say we need a clear reason. It now says we have to have a strong reason. Most barristers seem to think there's not a lot to play with between those two words, but there was clearly a reason why government thought that needed to be changed. And then just from practical point of view, the two main paragraphs that we use in national parks are now paragraphs 189 and 190. So alongside that NPPF, we've got new planning practice guidance. And going back to that discussion around the new standard method, there's specific acknowledgement within the PPG now that national parks and the local authorities that intersect with those national parks may need to use an alternative approach to working out housing need, but it's still expected to recognise the same factors that the standard method is based on, which is essentially existing housing stock and affordability ratios between average earnings and average house prices. So that those sort of things are still in the mix, and there's lots of conversations going on about how we interpret that paragraph. We're also expecting more changes to the PPG at some point, obviously not in January, because we're now moved beyond January, but in the next couple of months or so around flood risk, what vision-led transport planning actually really means, and also viability. We've got a new planning policy statement for traveller sites. Part of that is around clarifying what happens if you don't have a 5-year supply of traveller sites, and that really just aligns it to the situation you have with other forms of housing and refers back to that presumption in favour of development. It also tidies up the definition to make it compatible with recent court judgments, and adds in the people who have a cultural tradition of nomadism, can't say that word, or of living in a caravan. Just to reassure members that we were aware of that change when the latest Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment was being finalised, and that does take account of those changes. So another big announcement just before Christmas was around planning fees, planning application fees going up for householder development, doubling actually for most larger householder development, and also charges for prior notifications, discharge of conditions have also increased along with Section 73 applications. So that's applications where they're altering conditions of previous approvals. And that's really, that last one is to reflect the fact that sometimes those applications can require nearly as much work as the original application did. There's also a promise that the forthcoming Planning and Infrastructure Bill will introduce a power for local planning authorities to set their own fees. That is just for development management. That's not expanding fees to cover local plans or enforcement, and it would be on a cost recovery basis. But it's an acknowledgement, I think, that even with the increases that are now being put through the system, the development management process still doesn't wash its own face in terms of cost recovery. And then there's that last thing is around promising us again legislation to allow cost recovery for our input into nationally significant infrastructure projects, which we're not reimbursed for at the moment. So the Section 245 duty that came in a year and a half ago, or a year and a bit ago, through the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, that's the strengthening of the duty that now relevant bodies have to seek to further the purposes of national parks and national landscapes. This is a long-awaited guidance as to what that means in practice. It's confirming that it's an active duty. It's not enough just to say we've read it and now we're moving on. There needs to be some work to show how it's been applied and demonstrated with evidence. And there's also a very useful part in that that guidance around setting and how that duty applies to developments or changes that happen within the setting of national parks and national landscapes rather than within their boundaries. And there's some detailed comments around the sort of things that should be taken into account when looking at those proposals. So we're moving on now to the new stuff. This is, again, as Heather said earlier, these aren't consultations as such. They are what's called working papers, which is putting out really government's thinking on what should be going into the new legislation coming forward this year. There is opportunity to input into this, but that's mainly been through meetings with ministers, with civil servants, rather than, say, a formal consultation with deadlines. So this is the first one of those. This is the Planning Reform Working Paper on Planning Committees, which really seeks to try and get a standardised approach across the country to delegation and what sort of schemes go to planning committees. And they've looked at 3 potential models for that. They're also suggesting that dedicated committees for strategic development are a good idea, particularly for those authorities that do see a lot of larger scale development, and mandatory training. And obviously we already do mandatory training for planning committee members. So it's kind of about bringing all authorities up to a level rather than going somewhere where we haven't been before. And I think the key message that we've brought to those discussions is, as we've mentioned before, most of the items that come to this committee are being brought here because Head of Planning, in consultation with the Chair, thinks they ought to come to committee rather than because they breach anything in our scheme of delegation. And we think it's really important that we still have that discretion to bring items to committee. The next reform working paper we've got is called Development and Nature Recovery. That's around looking at making changes to habitat regulations and the Wildlife and Countryside Act, really to sort of have a more strategic approach to things like nutrient neutrality, but also potentially in the future how we mitigate on protected species. So they're looking at having a national fund, a national restoration fund that developers could pay into for strategic schemes that are delivered nationally, probably through Natural England. In terms of key messages here, our suggestion is that any sort of delivery plan needs to build on existing mitigation schemes rather than undermining those. And we'll need local organisations like ourselves to actually deliver on the ground mitigation. That's really not something that Natural England could do themselves. Devolution. It's a nice meaty one that I've managed to compress into one slide. So wide-scale proposals for changing the way that local government works across the piece, particularly where we've got two-tier arrangements at the moment. So there's a proposal to replace districts and counties with unitary authorities and introduce above the unitary authorities what's called a strategic authority, which is like a sort of federation of unitary councils, potentially with mayors. So we've had 2 bids which have been successful. There was only 6 across the country that were successful. 2 of them were in our patch. So Hampshire have put in a bid for a strategic authority with County, Portsmouth, Southampton, the Isle of Wight. And Sussex has similarly put in a bid for East Sussex, West Sussex and Brighton and Hove. So they're being fast-tracked. County elections have been cancelled for 2025. And we are expecting there to be elections for 2 mayors in this area in 2026. Those strategic authorities will be required to produce spatial development strategies. Think, I suppose, higher level structure plan, if those of you can remember that, but not down to the level of allocations, but sort of strategic policies and possibly broad locations. Importantly, distributing housing numbers. So that's seen as a key function of those documents. Any local plans we produce in the future will have to be in general conformity with those spatial development strategies. And if we have mayors, which it looks like we will have, then they potentially will have call-in powers for things that they think have a strategic impact on the area. They're also required to produce a local growth plan. So key message really, no direct impact on us. As far as we're aware, National Park Authority will stay the National Park Authority with planning powers, but we will be affected because we do so much partnership working, and our hosting arrangements in particular will be affected by that. And obviously from strategic planning, we will have impacts on future local plans. We're nearly at the end of this, sorry. Massive amounts that were given to us just before Christmas. Tweaks to Compulsory Purchase Act or powers. Now this is something that we've never used, frankly never likely to use, but it's a really good incentive to persuade landowners to get together and solve any delivery issues. And one of the proposals here is around how much somebody seeking to do a CPO would need to pay for land, and it's suggested that in certain circumstances that would remove any hope value, so it would be based on existing land value. That obviously makes it more accessible to those authorities that seek to go down that route. One concern that has been raised is one of the categories that's been sought to apply that to is land that's allocated in local plans. Clearly, the reason for that is because frustration at allocating sites which then never come forward. But what we don't want to do is dissuade landowners from putting their sites forward to local plans in the first place. Otherwise, that puts all the onus back on us as local authorities to find sites and then evidence why they should be in a local plan. So they do need to think about those unintended consequences when finalising that legislation. Streamlining infrastructure planning, so this is about making the NSIP process a bit slicker. It's interesting that, for instance, for solar farms, we get, or generally across local planning authorities, get lots of schemes which just go under the NSIP threshold because it's seen as easier to get those schemes through a normal planning authority route than to go through the NSIP process, which is the reverse of what NSIPs are supposed to be. So this is really trying to tighten up that process. And key message for us is make sure you don't forget protected landscapes in that. And you know, the mitigations and enhancements that we've been able to get out of some NSIPs, we still need to be able to have that ability to negotiate those. And then finally, this is a moving feast in terms of what we're expecting. The first one, for instance, which when I wrote the report we hadn't had, we now have got, which is the land use framework. That's being consulted on. That's a formal consultation, the only one in the batch at the moment, until the 25th of April. So we're discussing with partners, particularly national park partners, what sort of joint response should go in on that. And we've also got a system internally to try and collect views on that proposal from different parts of the organisation. So that's in train. We're also promised a general power of competence for national park authorities. So instead of only being allowed to do things that are specifically allowed in legislation, this would be more akin to other local authorities, which you can do anything unless you're told you can't in legislation. National development management policies. We've been expecting these for a few years now. We are promised them in the spring. That will be the government spring. So sometime before the summer recess, hopefully. That's going to have a big impact on our local plan review, depending on the transitional arrangements that come with those. We will have a further revised NPPF alongside that, because that will take out all of the sort of policies within the existing NPPF that apply to planning applications and put them into the development management policies, leaving an NPPF which only deals with plan making. So that we're expecting at the same time. We're also expecting regulations around the new plan making system, because that's due to be introduced in the autumn. And of course the big ones, the Planning and Infrastructure Bill and the English Devolution Bill. So no doubt I will be coming back to you in a few months' time with another similar report, but it is a fast moving piece at the moment. So recommendation is really for your comments, your steer, particularly on the key messages of the ones that are still current rather than finalised, so that can inform officers when we go into these meetings with civil servants and ministers.
Thank you very much, Claire. There's much to consider in that, isn't there? A lot of information there. Members, Gary.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Could we have the lights on, please? Wherever.
No lights? Yeah. Doesn't matter. I'm a bat, I can see. Claire, could you just put back that last slide you had there about our planning system? You said it makes it more urgent to do this. I mean, whether this is the right comment for this part of our discussions, there possibly could be a need for a planning committee meeting that only will deal with the plan. Because if we don't get it in soon or get it done soon, we might lose it under these new changes that are coming in. Because we really don't understand what's coming down the line unless you're, well, I just think we've really got to start accelerating that part of it. So just to be sure, I want a plan. I want an up-to-date plan.
Yeah, well, we all want an up-to-date plan.
But the way we're doing it, I mean, I know we set our timetable, and that was before this all came out. Perhaps we might need to think, okay, we might have to accelerate that timetable somewhat.
We may not be in a position to do that.
Anyway, that's my thoughts, Chairman.
Claire?
So the existing timetable sees us submitting around September the following year, not this year, before you all panic, September 2026. The absolute dead stop at the moment is December 2026. That's for us to go under the existing planning system. We may need to use that flex of the 3 months to deal with everything that's coming at us in terms of changes. So I'm just putting that out there at the moment. I will give you a formal report on that, but I don't think it's possible to accelerate the timetable. We might have to make it slightly longer just to deal with this stuff.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
Thank you, and thank you, Claire. Really good summary of so many different things coming at us. On that local plan making piece, I think it's fair to say that there are some changes here that could actually make it easier. We'll comment later on all the complexities, but things like a suite of national development management plan policies, not just for us, but for all plan making bodies, would actually make it easier. And I would say there is a real pace in government, and we're seeing this with our discussions with civil servants, to go at this quite quickly, with the overarching aim to make it streamlined. So I think our take should really be, how far does that streamlining suit our purposes, and make sure we don't get left behind.
Tim. Antonia.
I had a question about the appendix where you present your proposed answers to the government consultation. Can we go on to that document, or do we just want to stay on
I think
item
Claire
9?
probably has a comment to make about that. Because that consultation's gone, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's not a proposed response. That's the response that you agreed back in September to the draft NPPF. So that's gone. It was just a reminder of what you previously said.
Yeah.
Okay, so my other question was about devolution. And I'm going to sort of describe a vision where one vision of what happens when there are elected mayors, and see whether you think it's likely or whether it's going to be the opposite. I mean, in theory, we've got this duty to cooperate, and the elected mayor would be would they be bound by that duty to cooperate? Because if they were bound by the duty to cooperate to help us achieve our purposes and duty, that could help us in the strategic discussions to ensure that development was consistent with our purposes and duty. And perhaps the elected mayor, with their new powers and their new grants and resources, could provide alternative locations for development by enabling infrastructure and so forth. So that's the positive vision. Is that, do you think, the way that it will go? Or should we, in fact, be much more concerned about the risk of the elected mayor using their CPO powers to call in, and, well, principally to call in, although I think they'll also get the CPO powers that are currently with Homes England. So the good vision and the less good vision.
You have a comment, Claire?
Okay, I'll get my crystal ball out. I mean, just to unpick that a little bit, by the time we get mayors and spatial development strategies, we will be into the new planning system. So duty to cooperate won't exist. What we will expect is for that to be replaced by something similar, because these strategic authorities, in some cases, are still not big enough to deal with the problem of unmet need. So, you know, they will need to work together as spatial authorities to solve the problem as well. Yes, the reintroduction of strategic planning, which is what that is about, may well mean that problems at the moment where the national park is coming under pressure to take more housing, that is a mechanism possibly to resolve that, because they're going to be looking at it across the piece rather than individual local authority by local authority. The mayor will still have to abide by section 245, so he's a public servant, so that duty to further our purposes will still be part of their remit. How much they use their call-in powers, I think from experience of existing mayors, is very dependent on personalities, bluntly. So, you know, in theory, it should just be for strategic things that affect the wider area. Practice says that that's not necessarily always the case. So we will see.
I think from our point of view, the really important thing is that we remain noticed as a special case, not just one of the massive, of course, not just one of the massive local authorities, that we are a protected landscape and we must retain our ability to make decisions on our own landscape. Alan?
Yeah, just a very short point, which I think is related to that last one, because I noticed on one of the slides it was suggested that the mayors might have powers to designate the housing numbers required for national parks. I wasn't is that the one? Wasn't sure whether, and I have to say my own reading, which has not probably been anything like as full as yours, I'm not quite sure whether that's just a fear or whether the government have actually made it clear that, in other words, is it a fear because it's not clear that that might be the case, or is it specifically indicated by the government that the mayors will be able to impose housing requirements on national park planning authorities?
Do we know, Claire?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
What we do know is part of the spatial development strategies, which will be the mayor's responsibility, will have to distribute housing numbers. So the numbers at the moment are identified per local authority, council area. They will be amalgamated, and then it will be part of the role of that spatial development strategy to distribute those. What we don't know is whether that will include us.
That's still to play for us.
Yes.
Yes. Andrew?
Yes, I mean, a huge amount of information, as you say, is distilled, and we will go on debating this for some time to come, obviously, especially as more information becomes available. A couple of points in the report. One is the reference to the fact that we have finalised the Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment for South Downs in December. Well, actually, it's not quite true, because actually I thought, oh, this is interesting, so I looked it up last night, and in fact it doesn't cover a lot of the South Downs area. Presumably we're going to get one for the rest of the South Downs area in the fullness of time. I mention that just in case somebody's under the assumption that the entire South Downs is covered by that assessment. They're not. It's only Ada, Worthing, Brighton and East Hants. The Planning Committee, I think we of us around this table, are we being asked to look at one of those three options, or is it something which is going to come down from the top and hit us? Because I think we're the reassurance to people, and some were here today, that they can have their say and they're listened to. We are the public face of planning and planning decisions. And I'm sure the officers, whilst at times they think we're a nuisance, they're quite relieved actually to have us here on other occasions. Maybe not so many other occasions. But then if you look at para 5.3, which in effect is a summary, the key message, I note, and you've amplified this, that reports come to the Planning Committee at the discretion of the Director of Planning in consultation with the Chairman of the Planning Committee. When I was Chairman of the Planning Committee for 5 years, I don't recall a single occasion when I was consulted on which
things
would
have
come
changed,
through.
Andrew.
They certainly have, and I'm very pleased to hear that it hasn't been slipped in just to please people.
No, it hasn't been slipped in, it happens.
But I just thought I would, for obvious reasons, make that point, just in case it was something which was otherwise unclear. Well, we now know who to lobby, Chairman.
You do indeed.
I hadn't previously been aware that you had the say, or any say.
Well, now you know. Is that it? Oh, that's it. Yes, of course.
Just to clarify on the Gypsy and Traveller study, it does cover the whole South Downs. It's just that the authorities you mentioned were the commissioning authorities. So that's why they're in the title. They paid for it because a more detailed piece of work needed to be done for their areas. In the rest of the South Downs, it's been a case of just updating existing studies. But the whole study does look at the whole of South Downs.
Thank you. Stephen, oh.
Can I come back on that? Well, it is, the reason I said it in the way I said it is that it is very unclear on the website. It just specifies 2 separate documents, one for East Hants part of the South Downs National Park Authority and one for the Worthing, Ada and Brighton part. And that's why I said it. It doesn't say they are the commissioning authorities, etc., etc. So there does need to be clarity. Otherwise, I wouldn't be wasting your time now.
And quickly on the second point you raised about planning committees, I'm pleased to say that government, particularly DEFRA, have been very good, and there's a few of us from the directors of planning that are in direct conversation with DEFRA and via them to MHCLG on just what special cases the national parks are as planning committees, the need for that discretion that you've alluded to, and also, in fact, it applies to urban development corporations. There are 2 different bodies that are very different planning authorities in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd already offered Stephen the opportunity. I'll come back to you, Gary.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple of points. One of the points on the slides, I forget which one, Claire, my apologies, related to things that take place outside the park that have an effect inside the park. Do we think that's going to extend to the point where we can formalise a buffer around the park? I mean, obviously that would have implications on our neighbouring authorities, but are we going anywhere near that with that comment?
No. No.
So that's not something we could do ourselves because it would, by its very nature, will be outside of the national park. And it would be a very sort of clunky tool, I think. It's far more nuanced than that in terms of what impact development outside the park has on the park. It's not just if it's within a mile, it will have an impact. The things that are raised there around functional connectivity, tranquility, that, you know, they are much more nuanced than just having a buffer.
Okay. Do you want to come back?
Yeah, I agree with that, which is why I'm trying to determine whether there will be not a hard and fast buffer, perhaps, but a distance from the park where you can say, you know what, it's like a triple SI impact zone. You know, there may be another level of scrutiny required because of the potential impacts. Just wondered if we'd thought about that or whether it's been mentioned. Thank you.
Yeah, we have. Yes, I'm sure we have. Tim? Oh, sorry, no, it's Gary's turn next.
Oh, yeah, forgot about that. Getting old. I thought Mid Sussex had done a joint study on Gypsy and Travellers. We paid for it, and so did the National Park paid for it. And it was basically to reinforce our plan that we've got going through, but it is also to help provide evidence for the park. I think it might have been to do with the appeal that was going down in Falcon, which I'd like to mention later. So wasn't Mid Sussex part of that when we did one?
Yeah, so that's one of the studies that's been slightly updated as part of the overall study. So we had lots of individual studies for each district that intersected with the park, and what this does is bring them all together and provide a slight update.
Thank you. Tim?
Thank you. I don't think anyone's yet referred to the affordability accelerator, which we argued against in the consultation, pointing out quite eloquently that that would not just have a particular bearing on the southeast, but within that, because our house prices are higher even than in the general southeast, would have a potentially significant impact contrary to our purposes, perhaps, in terms of requiring a higher rather than a lower quantity of housing. I don't know how clear this is at the moment, but evidently the government did not heed, or so it appears, unless anyone can advise to the contrary, that representation of ours. I'd be grateful for confirmation of that, but also for any thoughts on what that might in practice mean for us in terms of how higher housing allocations.
Yeah, so as you say, those representations were made to the original NPPF consultation, and in fact the changes to the final one increased the impact of the affordability accelerator, which is why some of those figures have gone up even more. The issue of whether that then applies to a national park is still for discussion, because there does appear to be an opportunity in the PPG for that not to apply to the park. But, you know, we're still at the data gathering point on that. And I suppose the reverse way of looking at it is, and I'm sure Tim would want to come in on this, is, you know, we know that affordability is higher or more of an issue in a national park. That's more of a reason for us to maximise the delivery of affordable housing rather than looking at bigger quantities of housing overall. Tim?
Thank you, Claire. Yes, very well put. If it gives you any confidence, there's a number of discussions going on around whether, given that we are allowed to use a different methodology, how we should employ that. And to give that real teeth, I'll take it away from the affordability ratio bit for the moment and look at the housing stock bit. And there are a number of national parks that have got a large housing stock, of which 20, 30, 40% is second homes. So it's a bit odd to take your existing housing stock and then use that as an assumption why you need more homes, when actually they're not always necessarily based on local affordable homes, which is our primary purpose when it comes to housing. So it's quite an exciting, quite an intellectual piece of work, but it would have to be very well evidenced in order to justify going against the standard methodology.
Yes. One of the comments that I came up with really is all about this issue of delivery bodies and delivery plans. And it sounds slightly concerning to me, because it looks like Natural England are going to have a pretty key role in scrutinising these delivery plans, and they will be presumably they will be scrutinising the delivery bodies as well, or they might even be the delivery body, which sounds to me like that's just going to mean that everything's going to take 100% more time to achieve anything, and take from those decisions the local knowledge and experience that we currently bring to those decisions.
Yeah, we're in direct dialogue with both Government, DEFRA and Natural England on how this might work, because there's both positives and potential threats we need to be wary of. In terms of the potential threats, yes, the emerging proposals seem to be that the delivery plan will be done at a macro, regional, sub-regional scale by Natural England, but with input from others, particularly LNRS's, local nature recovery strategies, and all sorts of other bodies of information. So first point is to make sure that those delivery plans are truly holistic, if you like, and gather all the information that's out there, even though Natural England will be the keepers of it, if you like, or the approvers. That's one side. Then we come to the bodies that actually deliver the improvements, rather than do a case-by-case approach. We saw today 2 sets of applications talking about badger sets. All very valid. What the government is saying is, on large schemes, we'd rather just say, okay, there's an ecology issue or there's a biodiversity issue. Here's a delivery plan. Go and give us some money and deliver that. That's the idea of the Nature Restoration Fund. And I think our biggest opportunity there is that we can be a very good and already have evidenced at being a delivery body by our nature-based solutions green finance stuff. The threat is probably that if it goes national, we might be overlooked, or there might be other bodies that come in and try and get into that place. And that's where we need to play to our strengths of being locally based, existing partnerships and a proven model. And that's what we're saying, you know, as we speak to government. We can be one of your best delivery bodies.
Ah, right. Good. Good. Delighted to hear that. Anything else we'd like to say? No? In that case, I think we've concluded our deliberations on that one. Let's go straight to the recommendation. I need a proposer and a seconder, I guess. Thank you, Daniel and Andrew, thank you. So the recommendations are before you. Can I have a show of hands, please, to support those? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. And we're on to our final item on the agenda. So, Kelly, you've been very patient there, sitting waiting for us to finish this, look. And we're now on the appeal decisions, summary of the appeal decisions, September to January.
Thank you, Chair, and members, you'll be pleased now be really quick. So obviously you've got in front of you the usual appeal summary. So this covers from September to January. And you can see at 1.3 of the report, to date, our appeal dismissal rate is very good at 83%. And obviously you've got a very weighty appendix because of the number of appeal decisions we've had in that period. But just to summarise, generally, there aren't any concerning trends, and on a positive note, members will see a number of appeal decisions that just reflect what a high bar it is to build in the national park, particularly single dwellings in the countryside. And then just for members' benefit, sort of two key appeal decisions, because you are or have been involved in them. One is obviously the Dumford House appeal, which both were allowed. And the other was obviously the Queen's Hotel, which you're very aware of the history to that one. And obviously the most recent decision has been to dismiss and obviously ultimately refuse permission. So do members have any questions for me?
Thank you for mentioning that one. I am so pleased on that one. This is an appeal going through the system right now, and I've just sent on the stuff to you, Tim, from a resident in Small Acres and in Falcon. We refused the application, and but we didn't. Apparently our enforcement team's allowing a caravan on it, and they're waiting for the outcome of the appeal decision. And it's just that one.
Gary, can I hang on just a second? We've got a little issue here.
No, Chair, I was just concerned if this is an appeal that's in the system at the moment, whether... Oh, the decision, what you're talking about has been made. Okay.
Gary, we can't hear you because your microphone isn't on.
It's either going to be heard in April or the result comes out in April. I don't know exactly what it is, but I've sent it to Tim. I'll leave it with you, Tim, so you can have a look at it and then decide whatever.
Thank you. Thank you. Andrew.
Yes, I'll echo Gary's comment about the Queen's Head, and I'm sure I won't be the only one who does. I think, that the inspector did fire 2 barrels at that one for his reasons for refusal. In fact, he probably had a loader, because I think he picked up another shotgun and fired another 2 barrels at it. It was so thorough, his dismissal of the reasons that it should be permitted. But there's further to that, you implied that we had an input into Dunford House. That was dealt with by Chichester under delegated powers, it appears. But interestingly enough, I wonder, as it had been refused by them and it had been permitted at appeal, I wondered what our reaction would have been, because it has certainly been a little controversial. But that said, there were good reasons put forward why it should be allowed. The other site which slightly interests me is if you turn to page, or if I can turn to page, there's so many, as you rightfully point out, there are so many pages here that I've probably gone past it. Yes, it's actually on page 147. And this is a dog walking paddock appeal, which I happen to know quite well, but I'm not surprised by the appeal outcome, but I'm surprised by the reasons for the appeal outcome. And it's obvious, it appears that, that various reasons for refusal were put forward. One was the impact of the fencing on the area. Now, as far as I can see, the fencing probably would have been permitted development if we hadn't have mentioned the fact that there were dogs going there. And especially as the area in question cannot be seen from any public place. It's incredibly secluded. That fencing could probably been put there, and it would have been years and years and years before anyone was aware of it. However, the inspector did say there'd be no detrimental impact on the local highway network. Well, interestingly enough, the local highway network at that point is not the best. And so I was quite interested in the reason for refusal, and whilst it's probably too too detailed to say anything more about it. As I say, to turn around and say the fencing was the reason for refusal, and indeed the hedging, which could have also been planted there without permission, is slightly strange, I find. But whilst I've got the floor, I'd also like to mention, to flag up for members' interests, but I'm aware of an appeal where a year which was the period for comments by the applicant and local planning authority closed a year and 2 weeks ago, and this is a written reps, and it still has not been heard.
Wow.
And I thought I would flag that up. I keep thinking, is it going to appear on this page? Well, it's not, and I know it's yet to be dealt with.
That's an extraordinary length of time, isn't it? Kelly?
Yeah, if I just quickly on Dunford House, sorry, I should have clarified. Members were involved in earlier applications. You're right, the current appeal that was allowed was handled directly by Chichester, but members historically, you've been involved in the site. And then in terms of the fencing, Andrew, no, it's not permitted development for this particular scheme, so that's why it was included in the reason for refusal and the concerns the officer had.
Andrew's going to come and ask you, why isn't it permitted development?
Well, words along that scheme, but if, for example, they subdivided the field to put cattle in it, they could put fence up,
With
could
that
they not?
fencing around it?
That's the point, Andrew. It was for cattle. This scheme was for dogs. So therefore, that's the subtle difference. So, yeah.
Extraordinary. Oh.
It was empty, it was empty. May I just throw in the point that from recollection, it's purely from recollection, it's not actually that uncommon for decisions to be taken, for example, where you get sort of horticulture, subdivision of fields and so forth, for the view to be taken by planning authorities and supported by the inspectorate as well, that if such and such a change of use takes place, all sorts of undesirable things like subdivision with loads of fences and whatnot tends to take place as an adjunct or feature of the undesirable change of use, even if those things themselves can be done without planning permission, because if the field remains in agricultural use, although in theory it could all be parcelled up in a peculiar way, that isn't what normally happens. And I just make that point.
To wit, the ugly fencing that often comes along with horse paddocks.
Exactly.
All that white tape.
Exactly.
Oh. I'm sure one of you was going to speak. John.
On page 148 of your report, there's an appeal that happened in my own parish. We've just had another application that's almost identical on the same patch of land. Do we call this in, or do we leave it with Winchester? How does that work? Sorry, it's a technical question.
At the moment, it's staying with Winchester because obviously they dealt with the original application as well, and obviously they've got this appeal decision now to support any decision or consideration that they make on the current application.
I think you need to tell their officers. Thank you.
Antonia.
Yes, just very quickly on the Queen's Hotel again. Are there now any enforcement issues?
I would need to investigate for you, Antonio, but my understanding is some of the works that have taken place on the site are either didn't require planning permission in their own right, because some of the internal works don't require permission, and others, I think, if Richard will correct me if I'm wrong, but could be classed as permitted development. But Richard, if you...
Thank you, Kelly. Yes, there are elements that do constitute permitted development, certainly, but also the accommodation above the tap room, etc. There's no real material change of use as far as we're concerned. I don't think we have any active enforcement complaints on the site at the moment.
Thank you. Anything else? No? Good. In which case, the recommendation is that committee is recommended to note the outcome of the appeal decisions, which I'm sure we do. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes our meeting for today. Bang.